Here we are now. But let's see.
Just.
I'm not sure. Do we have members online, Jerry? Two. And are they online? In which case we're quorate. Before we proceed, Chair of PPC.
Thank you, Sir. At the moment, we are moving quite slowly through the order paper, and at this rate, we will not be finished. We will not finish the budget up this Friday. I would therefore like to propose that we agree to stay until 8:30 tomorrow evening, with a 15-minute break at 5:30, in order to complete business by 5:30 on Friday evening. So I make the proposition.
The proposition is there'll be a 15-minute break, and then these states will continue until 8:30 tomorrow evening to cover as much business as possible. Is that proposition seconded?
Yes, yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on that proposition? Yes.
Thank you, sir. So I always think that when we stay late and have a 12-hour day, bad decisions are made. And I would question whether this is the right thing to do, given that there is a lot on the order paper and it may go on longer than that. We have next week, we have Monday, we have Tuesday, and this is the primary source of our business to be in the States Assembly. So I would suggest that we have normal days, people have time to look and think about what they're doing, discuss what they're doing, and make the right decisions for this budget and for the island, rather than rushing decisions that might happen when we stay late. There's also the consideration of those who have families. I'm lucky my children are grown up. But perhaps if there's a facility for people with families to attend online, or indeed anyone who wants to attend online for their own well-being later in the evening, if they have to travel, do it that way if this is what's going to need to be done. But I don't think good decisions are made, sir, when we stay late, and it will just extend on the next day. This is like motorways. No matter how big you build them, they fill up. Thank you, sir.
Well, Deputy Binney?
Sir, I'm afraid I take the opposing view. If we could agree to stay late tomorrow evening, I think it would focus minds, and we might find ourselves in a position by 5:30 tomorrow evening where we don't feel a need to stay on. So I would, as I say, take the opposing view, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on this proposition?
Yes, sir. I just should point out that we have planning on Tuesday and Thursday next week. Whilst I'm sure members are quite happy to come back on Monday, Tuesday and Thursday's planning meetings are published in the public domain, and I think our chair would endorse that.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member? Yes, Deputy Reniff?
Yeah, I would support Deputy Ward. I do have a family, and there is an event on tomorrow night. I might have to not attend it on behalf of my son. But not only that, I think Deputy Binet talks about sharpening minds. I think it will sharpen minds even more if we don't have the extended time tomorrow. And the prospect of coming back as the following week as the incentive not to make our speeches too long.
Deputy Dublé?
Thank you, sir. Might I ask the chair of PPC to consider whether this could be deferred for a decision until later, because those with caring responsibilities, whether that's for children or family members, will need to make other arrangements before they can commit to staying late. So what I would suggest is that the notice is given at this time that this is being considered, and that it is decided upon and voted upon at the end of today, to give members time to make an informed decision about it.
Deputy Gardner?
I personally believe that working till late, like it was last time, it wasn't more productive. We can stay longer, but we also have next week and week after. We have enough time till Christmas, and maybe people really need to think how long we're speaking.
Deputy Alves?
Thank you, sir. I wonder whether an alternative would be actually to reduce our lunch breaks, which we have done in the past. Not significantly. I know there was a massive groan there, but we do have an hour and a half. I'm not suggesting we only have half an hour, maybe just reduce it by half an hour, so we still have an hour, because this has been done in the past, and that may be a halfway house. Thank you.
Well, I think effectively this proposition needs to be determined one way or the other, and then if alternative propositions, should it fail, then alternative propositions can of course be made. Deputy Miller?
So I just wanted to check if we did not finish this week that we would go to the sitting starting the week after next, because I'm out of Ireland for most of next week on a pre-planned trip. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the position is the decision that's only before the Assembly at the moment is whether to sit late tomorrow evening. So there's no other decision before the Assembly. Does any other member wish to speak on that proposition? No other member wishes to speak? I close the debate and call upon the Chair of PPC to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for their comments. Part of this proposition was actually to try and concentrate members' minds on the fact that we are running really, really slowly at the moment. So, and it's not to stop democracy or anything, but if people could be a bit more succinct in their speeches, that would probably help us all along, and then there wouldn't be any need to sit tomorrow evening. And it's also very, very usual for the government plan that we do. We all are very aware that there's always a huge agenda, and it's very usual for us to sit in the evening. I'm sure a lot of us carry out business in the evening, but you know, there's various committees and everything that we're all members of, and I'm sure we're all can manage to concentrate well for one evening. So I also take in caring responsibilities very, very seriously, but it is the government plan week, and I'm sure that members with caring responsibilities could join on teams. And I feel I have no other alternative but to make the proposition, and if it fails, then we'll think of something else. Thank you, sir.
Right. Did you call for the appel on this?
Call for the appel.
The appel is called for. The vote is on whether or not we stay late tomorrow evening, a 15-minute break at 5:30, followed by sitting until 8:30. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 33 votes for, 10 votes contre, 1 abstention.
So may I raise a practical issue? Movers of propositions don't have the timers. I suggested the timers be brought in, maybe to help myself. Would it be possible, sir, if the timers could be put for the proposers so that we know how long we're speaking for? That may help. It helps some of us that maybe speak and can tail us.
Those who propose, of course, are not time limited, and the main responder is not time limited. But there is no reason why we can't operate the clock, I suspect, simply for the purposes of letting people discipline themselves, which I think would be an excellent idea.
Members may be grateful for that for me.
Well, I'm not going to put that to the vote. I will take that as a decision.
So if the screens are not working, could we use an egg timer, perhaps?
Well, if we had an egg timer, that would be such a good idea, Deputy, but we don't. Right. We now continue with the debate on the First Amendment, and next to speak is the Conitava St Saviour.
Oh, thanks, sir. It was a series of comments following mention from the Attorney General. Basically, I was just about to say that I was cut off for lunch, having a senior moment, sir, that the money is not coming out of Social Security, but it was money that may have been allocated or earmarked for Social Security that will be diverted. That was the point I was trying to make, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. I too am experiencing a strong sense of déjà vu with this amendment, as Deputy Balash pointed out. Last year there was passionate resistance to the idea of using the grant that supplements the Social Security Fund because it needs topping up, and I'm not therefore assuming that those who championed its protection last year will hold firm to those principles today. If not, I really would welcome an explanation as to what has caused them to change their minds, because I am as yet undecided in this regard, and I really would like to hear from others. Because will we hear the same message from Deputy Southern, who firmly taught me last year that this ring-fence fund should remain untouchable? Or what about the Conotab of St John, who declared, and I quote, a 1.2 billion budget for an island of 103,000 people is amazingly high, and we should be doing better to live within it. In fact, in the last debate, he repeated this call, recognising that the budget had even gone up this year. What has changed for him in the past year that he now supports using the grant that supplements this fund, especially as we are debating a budget of roughly the same size as last year, or albeit a bit more, but one that entails severe cuts and crippling capacity in delivering across different services, as we are discussing. So nearly all the Conotars supported Deputy Balash last year on this similar amendment, and I trust they will remain consistent in upholding the principles and values they so strongly articulated then. If not, I really would like to ask them for clarity. Why will you reverse your principles and values for this now? And I turn to Deputy Rob Ward. He was unequivocal last year, stating, I quote, I'm aghast and so very disappointed. I emphasise the extreme importance that funding streams into pension funds must not be tampered with or used as a go-to piggy bank. He even compared Deputy Gorse to Robert Maxwell. Will he now apply the same criticism to his fellow ministers, or is this year somehow different? So I ask again, what is the difference now? This is not about where it's going to, because of course the Social Security Fund is a really important pot of money. And I also support a living wage. It's part of my manifesto. That is what we're not discussing now. What we are discussing is where the money is coming from to support the package. And this package at the moment is taking from this grant that is going to top up the Social Security Fund, is what I understood from the Attorney General. And as I've just asked fellow states members, I am undecided, and I would like to hear from those who are changing their minds from very, very strong resistance last year. Are we all still going to be Robert Maxwell's, or are we now not Robert Maxwell's? I'm very confused. I would also like to understand, if we do agree for this money to be taken for the productivity package, where is the data showing how the government will pay this back? Because this grant is to top up the Social Security Fund, and while this discussion was going on earlier with the Attorney General, the Minister for International Development actually explained to me that this top up to the grant is needed because the Social Security Fund isn't big enough to sustain all the different things that is needed. So that's why there's this grant that's needed. Well, I may be mistaken, but that's how I understood it. So this is now being asked to be diverted into another cause of this productivity package. So how is the government going to pay it back? What is the concrete plan to replenish this vital resource? Last year, there was a plan of paying it back. This year, I don't hear about this plan. And again, as I said, I fully support increasing the minimum wage. This is not about whether we support increasing a minimum wage or not. But it's about the mechanism behind how you fund the product package. And also, I think it's about that values and principles that we heard so clearly last year, and somehow it's different this year. And I don't understand what the difference is. So I really would like to ask my fellow states members to explain clearly to me what the difference is changing these mechanisms. I've got very excited, and so I then am not going to have gone away from my speech. I would also like to understand, because I just said, I was just talking about earlier about how the government is going to be paying the Social Security Fund back, or this top-up that will not be paid into the productivity fund, because we heard from government officials when they were talking to us about the productivity fund that they will naturally be increased because with the living wage, even though those who are being paid the living wage will not be paying into the Social Security Fund. But because there's a knock-on effect, wages will rise further in the hierarchy of a business. And so therefore there will be more money to the Social Security Fund. This is what we were told by government officials. But I ask, where is the data for that? Because we have many businesses in Jersey that have very small local and medium businesses, and there are only a few employees within that business. So how can they sustain this ripple effect? Is this sustainable for long term? I don't know, I haven't seen the data, but I would just like to ask, really, will this gap, will this hierarchical ripple effect really happen? And I would like to hear more on that. Because at the same time, this productivity package is about incentives, it's about productivity. But in practice, and I believe the Sustainable Economic Development Minister said this in oral questions as an answers to oral questions before, back in September when we were asking him this, that he believes that the productivity also is about businesses being more efficient, which technically also means reducing the amount of employees potentially that they could be utilising, because they'll be able to employ technology or AI or use automation to streamline operations. We've seen this with self-checkout machines at supermarkets, for example. So if there's fewer employees, that will mean fewer contributions to the Social Security Fund, not more. So again, I would like to hear a little bit more on how we would see this top up. There's also a question of opportunity cost. The money taken from the fund will not be invested, meaning it will not generate income. Can the government guarantee that the productivity grants paid out over the next 2 years will yield returns high enough to cover this initial amount, but also the lost investment in income? So I turn back to my fellow states members, and ask, what is the new evidence that has emerged to help you change your mind from last year to this year, to help me decide how I'd like to vote? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'm very pleased to respond to that, although not much to the tone, but there we go. So this is a key decision today. We have had many discussions in this Assembly and outside this Assembly about productivity, the need to train our own population, the role of apprenticeships in meeting the island's workforce needs, and the future of a sustainable economy. And today we have a clear choice to make within a specific context. So previous attempts to make payments into the Social Security Fund have been linked to projects that have had little attachment to anything I supported. And that is not where we are today. This is a use of taxpayers' funds to improve lives, to increase wages, to increase skills, to increase training, to address apprenticeships, to address all of the things that we've been talking about in this Assembly for so long. And now is the time to act on them. But instead of that, we go backwards. So, at the very beginning of my time in this role, I had a number of propositions lodged to define my actions. One of them was P.38, that called for fully funded apprenticeships. My issue with this is it was an undefined nature of funding and also the nature of what we were going to do with that money. Subsequently, we have worked to produce a clear strategy to target funding for this area in the best way, and the link to the future living wage. Those who voted for P38, 13 members of this Assembly, may disagree with the way I went about improving provision, but we share the understandings of the importance of this area. We are now at a stage where we move on from the previous government plan funding, which is where we are at the moment, into the next year's funding for projects. And I say to those supporting P38 that removing this funding at the first stage is counterintuitive to the proposal of P38 and my response to it. If you want to support apprenticeships, we need to start paying for it at some point. This is an intelligent way of using taxpayers' money without taking the usual money that goes from our social security that we all pay, I pay it, you pay it, that goes into the Social Security Fund, and directing that money for a very specific purpose to improve people's lives. And I want to be clear, so that if the money is directed from the Consolidated Fund, this limits what is available and is not a sustainable approach to fundamental support and change for training on this island. And too often in the past, we've had a piecemeal approach to training, to training our own, to developing a workforce, to improving their outcomes, to improving their wages and skills. And it's time now for a long, sustainable approach to that, to embed that in the way that we do things. So I was pleased to accept the amendment from the Children Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. This was working, trained and subject to the approval of the budget debate this week. However, within the Education and Lifelong Learning budget, I'll be allocating an additional £500,000 to apprenticeship funding. I have also accepted Amendment 5, which aligns with my ambition to improve locally available training opportunities. In doing so, we will broaden the career pathways available for our young people and strengthen local industries. Our work in this area has already begun, starting with an analysis of hard-to-fill job roles and the skills and qualifications needed for them. Also, pending State Assembly approval, the work was complemented by the £2 million skills grant that was announced as part of the Better Business Support package that will help employers invest in apprenticeships and skills. And sir, the word pending approval is important here. Supporting this amendment puts funding sources at risk and in turn the long-term development of our workforce. I ask members to think very carefully before supporting this amendment. And sir, why would my opinion change on this? For a very specific reason. We have to do this now. Now is the time to make that impact. Our young people are leaving. They cannot afford homes. We cannot have an island that is so expensive that lives on an unsustainable non-living wage. We cannot have companies who cannot take on apprenticeships because it doesn't work for their business model. We cannot continue to not support companies and young and old and middle-aged and wherever they are who want to train on our island, stay here, pay their taxes, pay their social security long-term towards the social security fund. Short-termism is not going to solve the problem here. And all of those who have wanted to emphasise apprenticeships need to say where the money's come from and what they're going to do with it. Disappointed that some members who perhaps had responsibilities there cannot see that. So we must develop the ongoing development, we must support, the development and ongoing support of our workforce to embed in our economy the principle of a well-trained and well-paid workforce. Long-term, having a workforce that is skilled, more productive and contributing to the Social Security Fund, that is what creates long-term stability. That is what creates the stability we need for this fund and for our future pensions. So the money used from not adding to a stable and well-funded fund is an investment in the future of this island. It's not being squandered on a computer system or some sort of nice to have. It's being spent on an absolute essential. And in a time where there is so much pressure on budgets, this is an effective and appropriate use of the money, the additional money that will be put into the fund. Now we need to think about that. And we need to think about, if we're not going to do this, where is that funding coming from, or are we just not going to do this? Where would you like to take it from? From the education budget, the support of special needs children. That's something that's putting pressure on us. Do we not want to provide a hot school meal for children in our schools? Do we not want to extend nursery provision for families with young children on this island so that they can get the best start in life for their children and build for the future? Those are the difficult choices that we have to make. And with this fund, we can add to those and we can add to our training. We can add to the skills of our island. So think very carefully. So the money used, So to the panel members, sir, your amendment will need long-term funding for effective implementation and drive to change. This amendment closes the door on this funding. And I think it's very important that we recognise that. I was very pleased to have the panel and I could, sit down and say, I agree with that, that's an easy one. Sometimes it's nice when you get an amendment, sir, and you can say, we can accept that. It's really easy because we're doing that and we're actually on the same lines. Fantastic. But we have to make sure we have a stable source of funding. Otherwise, this will not work. So, I'm sure there is agreement across this Assembly that what we want is well-skilled, well-paid and effective workforce to drive a sustainable economy. I've heard that said so many times. And we are taking the steps to address this using the skills that we have across our provision. Skills Jersey and Highlands working together to provide the most effective range of training opportunities and beyond. And before we can offer anything to businesses and trainees, we need to ensure the funding needed is available. I can't go out to businesses and say, here we go, here's the scheme for you next year, before we've even got the money agreed. And we are at risk today of not having that money agreed. So I urge members to think very carefully before making the choice to stop this funding today. Look at the long-term future, the work on targeted supports of apprenticeships, the transition to a living wage, and how we increase productivity has to start now. We can't wait any longer. Closing the door today will not address the concerns of businesses in Jersey, of trainees in Jersey, and the providers of training who are being so innovative in so many ways. Sir, I urge members to reject this amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Barbara Ward, you've already spoken, but do you have a question or something?
It was just a point of clarification. I have to say it was me that alluded the Treasury Minister to Robert Maxwell. I just wanted when you mentioned in your speech. Yes,
but this is now a speech.
Sure.
Someone has to give way for a point of clarification.
So that's quite important to me because
effectively
the Assembly was misled. I would like an apology, actually. Thank you, sir. Sorry. Standing orders do say that you can't misrepresent another member of the Assembly. I have actively been misrepresented. I've said things wrong in myself. You've picked me up on them and I've apologised. I've been quite open about that and in the heat of battle, I understand that. But it would be nice on this occasion if that was taken into account. Thank you, sir.
Well, we have here Deputy Barbara Ward, who has indicated she was the one who made that reference. Do you wish to say anything in response to that, Deputy Chair? I'm not going to get into a tit-for-tat matter about this, but you've been asked if you wanted to apologise for the reference to the mention of Robert Maxwell.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I read the Hansard last year, and I would like to just check to make sure that who it was before I make that, because that's what I read last year.
There we are. We can't take the point any further at this stage. No more do I propose to do so. The Connétable St Clement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I wasn't prepared to speak on this matter, but I need to get this situation back to an element of reality. I don't believe in emotional blackmail, and I have to point out that States of Jersey voted for minimum wage and living wage, but we didn't know where the funding was coming from. There was no allocation of funds from any state's area that I know of, not least the Social Security Fund. Now, I come from I'm a third generation states member, and I think my father and my grandfather will be turning in their grave, because it's always been the unstated fact, a sort of gentleman's agreement, you do not touch the Social Security Fund. It's sacrosanct. It's tipping us into unknown territory, where it gives all states departments and ministers the idea that if all goes wrong, or anything goes wrong, we'll just take a bit from here. And that doesn't wear with me. So to say that if we vote for this amendment, that we won't have all these lovely things to do with training, apprenticeships, etc., is leading you the wrong way. We will. It'll be got for somewhere. It will be produced from some other area because we voted on it. And I just need to point that out. From my point of view, also, it's a bit of a selfish, in a selfish respect, I don't want to be stoned to death, hung, drawn and quartered in the parish of St Clement's when I get back this evening by a bunch of pensioners. Thank you.
Well, I hope that's not a realistic prospect at all. Connétable St John.
Thank you, sir, and I wish my colleague well when he returns to the east, sir. So thank Deputy Jean for the invitation to explain the change in my mind. I'm more than happy to explain it. So it's been explained to us quite clearly. The grant isn't being reduced. In fact, the grant goes from 78 million to 80 million pound So there's actually a £2 million increase in the amount of money that will be paid into the Social Security Fund, sir. No money is coming out of that fund. No pensioner is being robbed. No one is removing money from the fund, sir. We are putting more money in than we did last year, sir. So that is very different. So last year I fell for the emotive language used by Deputy Baloch, but I shan't be falling for the same emotive language this year. Sir, the Attorney General explained to us before lunch the difference between putting money in and taking money out. Sir, I continue to strive to work within the envelope that's given to us, the amount of money we've got. I repeatedly tell colleagues, both in infrastructure and in the Council of Ministers, the value of money. How much is £1 million? How hard have you got to work to raise £1 million? It's incredibly difficult, sir. So I'm very familiar with working to budgets, often reducing budgets, zero budgeting. I've spent a whole career doing that, sir. From organisations such as the parish at £500,000 to businesses turning over tens of millions of pounds, sir. Sir, in infrastructure, we've certainly reduced our reliance on external consultants. And I'm using the services of Jersey Business, or the team are using the service of Jersey Business to improve productivity. Just two examples of how we are doing things differently to ensure we can invest where we need to invest, sir. Sir, the increase in the minimum wage is something I think I and most members of this House aspire to. Sir, the cost of living in Jersey is high, 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 and we have to help islanders who get paid small amounts of money to try and forge a better living. Sir, the cost of the living wage is substantial, the increases, and therefore we do have to do something in terms of a support package. As can be seen from the budget report, the annual £10 million funding will be maintained in a dedicated head of expenditure with all costs carefully controlled. It's not being put into a big pot, sir, for people to take a bit when they want it. Any funds remaining in that head of expenditure will be transferred to the Social Security Fund. So if we don't spend all of the £10 million, sir, it won't just be a £2 million increase on this year, it'll be a greater than £2 million. The proposal, I see it, is completely different to that put forward last year. The money that we don't put for the grant will be allocated to that dedicated head of expenditure to be used for a specific purpose, which is fully aligned to the long-term aims of the fund itself, and any money is not needed, as I said, will be paid into the fund at the end of the financial year, sir. I have no worries about getting stoned by parishioners on my return to St John's this evening, sir. I'm happy to explain myself. Thank you.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I thought this time I would try and get in before all the ministers had spoken, because I again would like some answers to questions. And I'm glad to come in, however, after Deputy Rob Ward. And I want to draw on the difference between what Deputy Baloch opened with and the position that Deputy Rob Ward takes. The first is one of absolute principle, that the fund should not be touched, and the fund constitutes that of an equation in the 1974 law that, although it can be amended, has a specific purpose. And the position, so far as I read it, I would have hoped to see a nod or otherwise from Deputy Rob Ward that he takes is, in this instance, the value of reducing that state's grant, that supplementation, is overweighed by the enormous requirement for that funding. And he's put across a very strong case for funding for apprenticeships and for skills. But of course, sir, that is not the only part of the living wage transitional support package that is being proposed by the Council of Ministers. It is made up of a productivity support scheme, which is a 50% match funded scheme administered by Jersey Business. A scheme very similar, targeted towards the visitor and retail economies. Further funding for the rural support scheme and funding for Visit Jersey and the attractiveness of Jersey as well. So the argument put forward by Deputy Rob Ward only attached to some of the money, And for members unsure as to whether they want to follow the absolute principle of Deputy Balash, or they want to understand whether the efficacy of spending what will be 20 million within the economy will have a greater return for the Social Security Fund in the long term through greater payments in or through fewer payments out. I think we need some more clarity as to how, and more answers as to how those other parts of the living wage transitional support scheme will deliver the benefits. So we have heard from the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning his pitch, so I hope the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development shall also provide his. And in particular, I would be interested, given we are happy, it seems, to debate the value of this package, not just the principles. I shall pause, sir.
Yes, and it's going up quite quickly unless you're able to switch it off.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And maybe we can direct that £10 towards the package should this proposition pass. Bit of digital training could help with the mute button. However, I would really like to know, sir, within the packages proposed for productivity, more about how the scheme ensures equity within its dispersion. The scheme may well be requesting data, as it has in past years, for the salary per hour of the lowest employee. And I would be interested if the Minister could confirm whether or not preference will be given to those businesses currently paying any employees below the living wage, because he has assured us that this package will not be something to reward businesses who pay low salaries and will be about general improvement to the productivity of our economy. And so I really think we've got a lot of answers as to those other packages. I think the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development is best placed to answer them, and I certainly, sir, would like to hear those answers as to some more details, so that members who may choose not to do this on principle, but on overall value to the economy and deviate from the principles quite well articulated by Deputy Balash, have the full and frank understanding as to the value of the scheme proposed in lieu of the full grant payment.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Sir, can I?
Sorry, what is your wishing to come back on what happened?
Yes,
before?
absolutely, sir.
If it is to say you were wrong and to offer an apology, then that I'll hear you now.
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to unequivocally apologise to Deputy Rob Ward for pointing that it was him doing the speeches. It was Barbara Ward. I usually don't say this, but I'm quite dyslexic, and B's and R's are actually really difficult for me. So I apologise. I never use it usually, and I apologise that I've used it now. But I tried to correct myself, but that obviously was a quick one on a Saturday morning, and I apologise for that.
Thank you very much for that apology, Deputy. It's quite appropriate. Deputy Renouf.
The apology isn't necessary. I'm going to read what Rob Ward said, Deputy Rob Ward said in the speech that he made last year, when I get to that point. So in many ways, this is an easy speech to make because so much of the heavy lifting has been done for me. So let me begin by saying this in reaction to the government's actions. I do not believe we should be taking money out of the funds. We should be living within our means. We all know that deferring payments that you are obliged to make once and then doing it a second time is the start of a very slippery slope that very soon becomes the norm. I warn members against it and urge them to support Deputy Balash. Let me pause for a moment there, because my words so far were all spoken by members of the current government in last year's debate about the same issue, the Constable of St John and the Deputy Luce, respectively. They were not alone, of course. Other members of Reform Jersey, in particular, were fully behind Deputy Balash a year ago. Deputy Southern said this: Deputy Balash, when he gets it right, boy, does he get it right. He is absolutely correct in saying that this is a ring-fenced fund which should not be touched. He went on to describe government contributions to the Social Security Fund as sacrosanct. Deputy Tadia said there is a contract between the public, between the employee and the employer and the states. And it is not just this government, but it is governments and the states in its wider form, the past, present and future. So it was about fundamental issues of trust. And Deputy Ward did say this is from Hansard last year. Deputy Rob Ward, what in my view is happening draws parallels with the famous Robert Maxwell case some 40 years ago where money was diverted.
Sir, a point of order, if I may.
Yes, please.
I have the Hansard in front of me. He is quoting from Deputy Barbara Ward, not Deputy Rob Ward, and misleading the Assembly is against standing orders.
Sir, I do in that case apologise. I've made the same mistake.
Sir, may I please make a point of order? We are getting increasingly just personal attacks, which is in Hansard. They're not even correct. But this goes in Hansard, probably reported by the JEP. This is totally unprofessional behaviour.
That's not a point of order. It's a point of order is only something on which I can make a ruling, Deputy. I appreciate you may feel strongly about it, that you have been misrepresented not once but twice, and I fully understand that that would be, but it isn't a point of order, I'm afraid. An apology has been made by both members of the Assembly. Yes, Deputy.
Yes, sir, and I will reiterate that. I am sorry. I am sorry.
No, please, I appreciate you feel strongly, but I don't want an exchange across the floor.
Sir, if I may, a point of order. There is in standing orders, I can't remember what it is because I haven't got it up in front of me, a point that says that you must not impugn a state's member. Now, so it happened once, 3 minutes ago, and then second, exactly the same misconception and error and, be honest, sir, dishonesty, because it was inaccurate. It was inaccurate, sir.
Firstly, Deputy, I must stop you now because you're running the risk of doing exactly what you said. Firstly, the Chair is speaking. If you accuse someone of dishonesty, you are effectively saying they have deliberately made a falsehood. Now, what has happened is Deputy Jeune made an error for which he apologised. Deputy Renouf, incredibly, made the same error for which he has apologised. Standing orders prevent members being impugned, but the fact is, if a member is impugned by someone else, that is met by an apology. It can't be met by anything else unless it crosses a threshold of being completely deliberate, in which case we move into the territory, if it is not withdrawn and an apology given, which it has been, I would instruct the member to leave the Assembly. But we're not in that territory yet. You've had the apologies, there's nothing more to be done. I'm not sure what order you want me to make under a point of order.
It doesn't matter, thank you.
Very well. Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir. I do apologise. It was an error on my part. I wrote most of this speech at the weekend. I did make the same error as Deputy Jeune, and I repeat my apology for it. What I would say is, absenting the speech, the wrongly attributed speech from, that I mentioned previously, that strangely in all the other speeches made by members of Reform Jersey last year, to explain the fundamental principle of not taking money away from the government grant to the social, that they did not make the point that the fundamental principle of not taking money away from the government grant to Social Security Fund didn't actually apply if it was being spent on a Reform Jersey policy, which is what I think is the point that's now being made. And of course, as we know, the points that were made also and backed by many of the present Council of Ministers, Deputy Lehegerab, Deputy Mesic, Deputy Feltham, Deputy Rob Ward, Deputy Luce, Constable of St John, and of course the Chief Minister. The government's justifications, as set out in its comments paper, is essentially this. There's plenty of money in the fund. It's important that we support businesses through the living wage transition. The money will help develop a higher wage economy to the eventual benefit of the fund. And if you vote for the amendment, you'll be putting the consolidated fund into deficit. I don't think any of this remotely stacks up. I'm in favour of the living wage. I think it's a good policy, and I support the government's moves in this area. And although there are elements of the business support package with which I disagree, I'm not against it as an idea. This is not about the living wage or the support package. It is about how they are funded. The point I would make, it is not the fault of members of this Assembly that restoring the grant to the Social Security Reserve Fund would put the consolidated fund into deficit in future years. That was the government's choice. They did not have to go down this route. Deputy Balash's amendment was wholly predictable, and the Assembly has already expressed a view about the principles at stake. They could easily have squared the need for money to support business with the principles of a year ago by finding the money from elsewhere. And we know that was what was originally planned. In June of this year, the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development answered a question from me about the source of funds for the support package. He said, the £10 million for each year will be found through the reprioritisation of existing spending. The reprioritisation of existing spending. Under further questioning from Deputy Jeune and Deputy Stevenson at that time, the Minister did not once mention there was an obvious case to be made for taking the money from the Social Security Reserve Fund. So we know what has happened. When ministers were asked to stump up to pay for the Living Wage Support Fund via the reprioritisation that Deputy Morel mentioned, they declined. The principles of a year ago turned out to be less important than a deal done in government. The price of the Council of Ministers' support for the living wage was that the Social Security Fund be offered up as a sacrifice, along with the principles of a year earlier. Of course, last year, the government of which I was a part also proposed reducing the Social Security grant. There was a difference, however. We proposed repaying it. Indeed, the speech I made on the equivalent amendment last year focused entirely on this point. The Assembly, however, did not buy the commitment to repayment. It basically said that it didn't believe the repayment would happen. I, for one, learnt a lesson that day. I do not go quite as far as Deputy Balash in his implacable opposition to ever using the Social Security Reserve Fund in some way to help fund other government expenditure. But I think the bar should be exceptionally high. The government says that the reason it is appropriate to reduce funds to the Social Security Fund this time and different to what is different this year is that this time the money is being used for a purpose that is in line with the purpose of the fund. Indeed, they argue that the fund will benefit from having money taken out of its grant. Let's test this idea. If it was such an obvious and appropriate source of funding, it's curious that the government didn't suggest it in the first place. I think they know full well that the reason this has been suggested is because ministers weren't prepared to take the pain of 10 million cuts to their budgets, not because the Social Security Fund was going to benefit from the raid. By that logic, we'd be doing this all the time. Anything that could be perceived as perhaps one day in the future leading to higher wages or economic growth would be justified. If it was such a good fit with the purposes of the fund, we would expect to see tables that showed future rises in wages and how they would actually lead to an increase in the fund in the longer term. There are no tables because it is not an evidence-based argument, it is a bit of rhetoric. Another way of looking at it is that we would expect to find clear lines marking out what in the future might be appropriate to source from the Social Security Fund, what would qualify and what would not. There is no such clarity. No, sir, this is a retrofit. The justification has been reverse engineered to fit circumstances in which ministers would frankly rather not find themselves. We've also had a bizarre semantic argument about plundering. Because the money isn't being withdrawn from the Social Security Fund, it isn't actually being taken from the fund. It's a bit like arguing that you're not robbing the bank if you make your raid on the van carrying the money to the bank. Technically, it's not a bank raid, but the bank ends up without money that was otherwise due. For the avoidance of doubt, I'm not saying that the government is stealing the money. It's a metaphor to illustrate the argument about whether you intercept the money due to the fund before it arrives or after it arrived is semantic. That is not the point. It is a reduction in what the formula says should be going in. The government's argument is a fig leaf designed to cover their embarrassment at having to bring this forward. Unfortunately, it is such a flimsy fig leaf that the government's embarrassment is in full view. And I have to say, it's not a pretty sight. And you know, what is I really don't understand, and perhaps the Minister can explain this. As far as I can see, it isn't even necessary. If this amendment passes, the fund isn't even in deficit this next year. It's only in the following years. There could have been 1 year's funding brought forward with a review to look at the next year. I don't understand why everything had to be staked on it this year. We've heard a lot, in fact, about it in response to other amendments about not committing ourselves in advance. They could have just brought forward 1 year's funding and then tried again next year for another batch. So the principle of which Deputy Balash speaks is a good one. I'm fully supportive of the move to a living wage. It is good policy. It does not and should not depend on raiding contributions to the Social Security Fund. We open the door to the Social Security Reserve Fund Social Security Fund contributions at our peril. I don't think the case has been made, and I will be voting for the amendment.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I think it goes without saying at this point that the tone of this debate in most recent minutes has been very regrettable, and I pledge not to stoop to that level, sir. I would make the general point, sir, that it's not a great idea to try to call others out on their record and accuse them of inconsistency when you're about to take an inconsistent position yourself in a debate on how to vote for something. You know, we're all going to make arguments to try to persuade people, but we ought to make them we ought to align those with decent values of being true to our politics and true to the facts, sir, and it's disappointing that that's not been the case so far. A couple of members spoke about feeling a sense of déjà vu in this debate. I feel no sense of déjà vu whatsoever, certainly not with last year, where the Assembly was asked to not pay through the state's grant to the Social Security Fund on the basis of giving the government some breathing space in its budget. This year, we're being asked to do so to take part in a cause for alleviating in-work poverty in Jersey. And I'm not embarrassed by that. I am proud of that. I have never felt the optimism that I feel now, that a cause that I have been working hard for 10 years alongside others is now at the brink of being achieved because for lots of reasons, in part the leadership shown by the Chief Minister in sticking to his guns on that and being willing to make it a part of his platform, the work of the Social Security Minister and the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development in trying to find that compromise that people can buy into to ensure that those that are on low wages can feel confidence and those in business can feel confidence, and doing so for a purpose which I struggle to think of something you could find that would be more in line with the principles of the Social Security Fund. That fund exists, sir, for what's in the name, social security. It's not just about paying for our pensioners, but it's about paying to support people on low incomes. And this project, being led by this government to put forward this business support package for the transition to the living wage, is absolutely in line with that. And if implemented, at the end of this, we will be a more equal and fairer island because of it. I think that that's a good use of money, and it is nothing like what we've been asked to do in previous years. So I remember 10 years ago, shortly after I joined the States, where a previous government was debating its budget, and it proposed a £10 million cut in the Social Security budget, which led to severe cuts to support for single parents, for people with disabilities, and for pensioners, exacerbating poverty for groups that already disproportionately faced poverty. Sir, this government, in its proposal for the use of amended input into the Social Security Fund, is doing so to alleviate poverty. What a fantastic transition that was from where we were a few years ago. And sir, I will keep coming back to a point frequently throughout this budget debate and potentially other debates in future too. But I think that it is vital that whatever our politics are, we ought to be fiscally prudent. We ought to be honest with our electorate and say to them, when we're going to make tough choices, when we're going to argue for an expansion of this policy or that policy, or this change in a service provision, that we say how we're going to pay for it, and to essentially scupper a scheme by diverting the budget away from it without proposing what a reasonable alternative would be is not fiscally prudent. I wouldn't agree with it, but I would accept the legitimacy of an argument that said we don't need to find this £10 million for the support package next year because on philosophical grounds I disagree with having that kind of support package. I wouldn't agree with that position, but I would accept that it would at least be a philosophically consistent position and one that's totally legitimate to argue. I would equally find sympathy with any argument that said, I like what the government is trying to do here, I just disagree on their source of funding, and so here you go, here's another source of funding you could use for that. I could agree with that. But to propose simply pulling the rug from underneath the feet without saying, don't go ahead with the package or find your alternative funding here instead is fiscally imprudent, and I hope members don't fall for it. So there would, of course, have been a very easy alternative that could be used to make sure that the Social Security Fund got the income into it that it otherwise wouldn't. And that, sir, is to abolish the upper earnings limit for Social Security contributions. The 2% limit, which above incomes of around about £280,000 employers pay, not a penny more after that. If that cap were abolished, that would not affect a single working person on the island, and it wouldn't affect the vast majority of employers either. It would exclusively affect the employers of people on extremely high salaries, and that would raise over £9 million. That would have helped bridge the significant part of that gap. But that's not the proposition made by the proposer of this amendment. If he had proposed that, I'd have had great sympathy with it. I would have been shocked, but I'd have had sympathy with it. So instead, sir, it's to seek to put us in the invidious position where the hard work that has gone to get us into such a positive position in this programme to alleviate in-work poverty in Jersey will suddenly have lost that compromise position that members of government have worked so hard with the business community to try to achieve, and it will send out a message to the lowest paid people in Jersey that we're going to make their transition out of in-work poverty as difficult as possible because it's not a priority for us, and we're not prepared to use a source of funding that is completely legitimate and in line with the purpose of that fund, which is to support people, not just pensioners, but those facing poverty. So I see no reasonable comparison with what the government is asking this year with what it asked last year, and I see no inconsistency whatsoever in saying we don't want those funds adjusted when it's for breathing space for a government budget, but we're happy to do so if it's for the cause of alleviating in-work poverty. I've been very optimistic about that journey in this term of office up until now, and I hope at the end of this day I can feel as optimistic about it too, because without that and without any decent alternatives proposed by the proposer, that work can be put at risk, and that ultimately it's the poorest people in work in our society that will pay the price for that, and that, in my view, is a price we should not be asking them to pay. So I think there are no philosophical inconsistencies in taking this approach for this debate as compared with last year, and I'm proud that I'm part of a government that is working so hard to alleviate in-work poverty.
Does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I am going to be obviously supporting Deputy Balash. The Social Security Fund is one of the greatest strengths that I have used on many occasions to say about the trust and the confidence and the importance of our public finances in Jersey. And I believe I can do so with good, with a absolutely practical and honest approach And it was 10 years ago today, sir, that I welcomed all my alive previous predecessors into Cyril Marcon House to celebrate the new public finances law, which we'd got on a 3-year basis now since abolished. And the reason why I did that is because each one of those members, Senators Jeune, Senators Horsfall, Senators Walker and Senators Le Sueur, had all been part of very difficult times and got us to where the Treasury Minister and the Council Ministers find ourselves today in, which is an island which has robust public finances almost incomparable to other jurisdictions of our size. And that is because all of those Treasury Ministers, despite challenges and difficult times, despite the challenges of the international tax, despite financial challenges, the greatest financial crash, I could invite the the last Treasury Minister or the current one because they weren't there at the time, because it was 10 years ago. And every time that there was a challenge, those Treasury Ministers could have been, and of course Senator Le Sueur had been a member of, been the President of Social Security. He was the man that had the foresight to raise those contributions all those years ago, gently and slowly, to ensure that there was a buffer. There was the Social Security Reserve Fund there to ensure that the ageing society can have confidence that their pensions, and it's not only pensions, of course, it's other statutory allowances that this Assembly decides upon from time to time and improves. Maternity allowance. There is a whole load of entitlements with the bond, with the contract between members of our society who are required to pay their social security contributions. There is a deal, and that is a deal that this Assembly is, of course, sovereign. There's been some very interesting cases in the Court of Appeal, sir, which I've read most interestingly about the absolute primacy of this Assembly to make laws. Yes, we can pass laws. We can pass laws and change things, but we do so with the knowledge, I hope, that we do so respecting the reasons why those laws are there and why those laws were crafted. Of course, this Assembly is sovereign. At the very heart of our system of the Social Security Fund, unlike other jurisdictions, has been a consistent approach not to tamper with it. There is a bond of trust at the heart of the Social Security Trust, the fund, a bond of trust between contributors and the recipients or the future recipients that will receive their pensions. Pensions that rise, not by, as Barbara Castle, I'm sure, would in the UK be very proud of, not just inflation, but an inflation rate which is tailored, which is a special inflation rate, which is the inflation rate for our older community who often suffer an even greater problem with living wage. We can be proud of that, and we can do it. And that is, I think, both the recipients of sick pay and maternity allowance and death grants and things like that, they know that the fund is being invested in good hands. We'll come back to that on another occasion. And they also know that the states will stand by their commitment to put the money in for those. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this supplementation, about this grant that's given. The grant is given because it pays effectively for those members of our society who, because of their low earnings, can't put enough into the fund that makes their entitlements, their pension, able to be paid in full later. It's a very clever system. It was often talked about as a third, a third, a third. It's not quite that way now, but that's the way that the fund is there. And so it's been, Deputy Balish is quite correct to say that there was some tampering with in extraordinary periods of COVID. And I was a member of the last government, and I was a bit perplexed really coming into government, seeing that there'd been some sort of odd deferments of payments But I was very happy with the fact that I knew the government of the day was going to repay it. And that was absolutely right. Those contributions owed to the fund by people on lower incomes were going to be repaid. Now, the decision there's been some very interesting, important. We in this Assembly have an onerous responsibility in making laws to uphold public confidence in the system. And the Attorney General, I think, has been placed in a rather difficult position, asking effectively sort of legal questions. I don't need a lawyer to tell me what my fiduciary responsibilities are, and I would encourage all members of this Assembly to have their fiduciary responsibilities. We not only are the legislators of this island, but we also make decisions about the levels of some additional contributions which we make from time to time, like maternity entitlements, etc. And we know that that's going to actually be reviewed, and their ability to be paid is going to be reviewed from time to time by an actuarial report. And we've had that, and we benefit from that. And that's perfectly fine. But what is, I think, my Deputy Balash is absolutely right. And there can be occasionally, because of cash flow considerations, an agreement between the fund and taxpayers to say, well, look, we're going to make that contribution a little bit, we're going to make that contribution 1 year later. But that's done on trust. And when I met all those Treasury ministers 10 years ago today, we had a 3-year budget, which meant that I could guarantee that those, if I did, I don't think I ever did actually in my time, but if we did defer a payment into the fund, that 10 million or so would have been definitely paid. Now, we're going to come on to investments later about the fund. That's really important as well. But effectively, the Social Security Fund is an absolute cornerstone of social and financial stability and certainty for our island community. There are many people that live off the Social Security Fund as their only form of income. And we've had a debate about the taxation of it, brought by Deputy Barbara Ward. And we've had lots of debates in the Assembly about the use of the Health Insurance Fund and what that should be used and what that shouldn't be used for. It would have been tempting, sir. It would have been so easy. We're faced with some problems with 150, Madam, sorry, Ma'am, it would have been so easy to say in those difficult times when we faced 150 million deficit, to say, oh, we'll sort of tamper with the Social Security Fund. Guernsey did it. Guernsey cut their. I don't criticise them. It's their policy choice to make it, but they cut their supplementation. The Treasury ministers always had difficulties with Social Security presidents and Social Security ministers banging the table and say, yes, I will have my supplementation because I need that to pay to ensure that the fund has got enough money. And indeed, the way that the fund has been so skillfully, what foresight that Senator Lesueur had in persuading, it was very uncomfortable. I was here just about at the time. I heard my late father speaking about the increasing costs of, we're seeing what we're happening in the UK with the increase in national insurance on employers. It wasn't very popular, Mum. It really wasn't very popular, but it was done, it was notched up ever so carefully. But a deal is that was going to make sure that those people with an ageing society, which he foresaw, like the mathematician, brilliant mathematician he was, could be maintained. In fact, a friend of mine who happened to actually be one of the actuaries, they say that an actuary is an accountant that finds accountancy too boring. Actuaries are really clever people, and we're benefiting from their massive, hugely complicated financial results. And we've had a actuarial report that says our fund is in pretty good state. Now, what are we going to say to those pensioners that we are kind of changing rules? We're kind of using it for something rather different. There is nobody in this Assembly that can really stand there and say, as much as good policies are being advanced by the government about the living wage, and other things. They are other things. They are not the thing to do with benefits, entitlements, and pensions. Moving to the living wage and subsidising businesses is not about pensions, entitlements from a fund that people have been paying into. It's not the deal. It's not part of the deal that people pay. And I think there's a problem with trust in politics. There's a big problem with trust in politics. And I think we start making withdrawals, because this isn't like a deferment of a state supplementation. This is a withdrawal that's got no repayment mechanism. It's very different. And when we start this, which I've had to resist as a Treasury Minister that was told not to increase GST or increase it at all, with Senator Lassuer at the time, where we faced 150 million of deficit, and we had all these end of the world. I remember a proposition from Deputy Southern saying that we should touch the Social Security Fund. I've got it in front of me. I can tell him the P number. That's not being disrespectful. He's entitled to his opinion. We had a debate, and we said no. We said no. All of my predecessors at the Treasury backed their Social Security ministerial colleagues and said, no, we're not touching this fund. This is the People's Pensions Fund. This is the People's Pensions Fund, and we're not going to do anything to compromise its ability to pay pensions into the future. So it's not about law. We're legislators. We can pass the law. We can pass good laws, and we can pass not so good laws. But all I know is what the purpose of this Social Security Fund is. It was very controversial at the time. We haven't had a mention of the coffins, ma'am. The coffins that came through the square from I think it was a deputy or somebody, Lamarck, who said it was going to end because people were being asked to pay contributions. There was a coffin brought into the Royal Square. I think hopefully all our predecessors would say that we've done a good thing, and all those of the assemblies that did have challenging times. There are lots of people on low incomes. I keep on saying that the elephant in the room is actually not the people not receiving the minimum wage, but let's leave that to another day. I won't be coming to save, to try and get the millions that are required to bring them up to the minimum wage by raiding the Social Security Fund. Maybe words like Maxwell and others are inflammatory, but they speak to a general and important rule that you do not tamper with people's pensions. This is a pay-as-you-go pension like no other. It's a pay-as-you-go pension that's not fully funded. It requires continuing contributions, but it's as good as it gets. And let's keep it that way. Because once we start, like the first day I learnt, my first day at work, and I worked for an American corporation, and I was told this company never bribes. You bribe once, you take a bribe, and it's never the second time. And I'm not saying this is bribery, but once we start taking withdrawals from this fund like this, it's the start. And we put an undermining of trust in the people that are seeing month in, month out contributions taking from their wage packets. Every month. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for self-employed especially. And when we start saying, actually, we're going to use this for something else, I say absolutely no. Just like my predecessors, just like I hope my successors. I'm surprised that a former Social Security minister not actually banging the table and saying, no, we're not using the Social Security Fund for this. He would have done that when he was Social Security Minister. He would have done it with me.
No, please
He'd have told me off. And so anyway, I've reached my minute.
Through the chair, if you're going to, not he would have done that.
Sorry, I say to the chair, sir, and I've run out of time. But I make the point. It's very, very important. Thank you, sir.
Very well. Deputy Southern.
That feels like a lecture in mid-afternoon at university. I remember those days. Very enjoyable they were, and I learnt something. But this debate today is about making an aspiration into reality. And significantly, in this particular case, and in many things that we do, the key is what? The key is money. Where's the funding coming from? That's where we are. And what we have is a society where inequality is enormous. Inequality is enormous, and it's going up. The latest surveys suggest that we're now overtaking the UK in terms of relative levels of relative poverty. So the question that I apply to this plan is what do these amendments or these proposals do to poverty? Do they increase poverty or decrease equality? It's important for me that they reduce poverty. However, it seems to me that what went wrong with this debate is that Deputy Balash's report suggested that nothing has changed since he lodged a similar amendment this time last year. This government's proposal is, however, completely different to that put forward last year. The money withheld from the state's grants will be allocated to a dedicated head of expenditure to be used for the specific purpose, which is fully aligned to the long-term aims of the fund itself to increase equality, reduce poverty. And any money not needed for the support package will be paid into the fund after the end of this financial year. So in terms of payback, anything that's not used will come straight back into the fund. The proposed budget ensures the support package is fully funded through an adjustment to the legal value of the state's grant. If the budget is agreed as proposed, then members will be asked to approve a change of Social Security Law P.62 to provide for the value of the grant to be set in 2025 and 2026 as proposed. The law change will then set the formal legal value of the grant at the new level for those 2 years only. So we're not talking about a large-scale reduction of the fund, but for 2 years only to cover this period. That's what we should do. And to illustrate the difference between the last proposal and this time, we can turn to page 127 of my remarks this time last year, where I say the question must remain, I think, and the question needs to be asked and needs to be answered as to what are you going to do, ministers, with this £7.1 million? Because this time last year, we were talking about £7 million. Not 10 in total, but £7 million. And there was no direction as to where it was going to go. We were just taking this apart and putting it in a box in case we needed it. And in the context of what good will it do, I think what we can say is that members have approved a change to the employment law P36 to allow the Minister for Social Security to set the minimum wage for 2025 and 2026 by order The Minister has confirmed that the 2025 minimum wage will be set at £13 per hour from 1st of April 2025. So we're already at what we propose as the minimum, as the living wage. The transfer from the minimum wage to the living wage ought to be fairly straightforward. And we have basically two mechanisms for creating greater equality and reducing poverty. We've got the social security system, which is contributory, where, as been pointed out by Deputy Joseph, the employer pays a third, the employee pays a third, and a grant from the state's revenues pays a third. And that's how it's made up. This goes to primarily to pensions, but it gives access to short-term incapacity, long-term incapacity, GP access, etc. It does a lot of things to alleviate poverty amongst our society. And I've lost my place. So quickly. Yeah, I've said that. So the reason for my change of mind in terms of this time last year and this year is that we have a way and a mechanism that we wish to use for this £10 million in each year in order to smoothen the way to the living wage rather than the minimum wage. Time to turn aspiration, as I say, into reality.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I want to raise a point that's been raised in this Assembly for a number of different debates on a number of different reasons, and that's this term of just transition. We've heard that we needed a just transition for the fishermen to stop trawling, and as we look to our marine protected areas. We've looked at a just transition to move to a carbon-friendly environment. The idea that we could afford to give people who could afford a £2,700 electric push bike a £300 grant. In fact, we could give people a subsidy if they bought an electric car. These are people who could potentially afford to buy these vehicles anyway, but we gave them the slight incentive to buy a greener, more carbon neutral form of transport. And yet we find ourselves, when it comes to helping businesses transition to a living wage, to offer them a support package to help this be accomplished, this is where we seem to have a problem because of how the funding is being allocated. So when the allocation of money goes to the Social Security Fund, as has been mentioned, that fund is there to help support people, provide something called income support, because people whose income need to be topped up and supported because their employers either can't afford or won't pay them a living wage. So we look at what then improvements of productivity can do to help businesses. And I always think there's always a really good example that we have in Jersey of where productivity helps and innovation can help improve a company's ability to pay the living wage without actually having to reduce their employment. And I always feel it's weird because it's McDonald's. Now, McDonald's has a really big infrastructure behind it. It's a big, massive global franchise. And through innovation and technology, they entered these big screens as you walk in where you can order your own food. It gets processed, automated, goes to the kitchen staff where everything is then prepped and provided. You can walk in, you can get your food pretty quickly. I'm informed I don't actually eat at McDonald's. However, McDonald's saw an upturn in their business, the speed at which they had to return, the amount of people they had to employ. But the biggest point in this is McDonald's has been a living wage employer for many, many years. And they actually, and this is all of their staff, from the people they employ to make sure they maintain their hygiene ratings, their cleaners, to their servers, to their people who work in the kitchen, their managers. They also provide huge amounts of training courses for their staff. It's kind of exemplary how, with the right motivations, that these industries can actually increase their productivity, which increases their returns and results, which means that they can pay their staff a decent wage. Now, not every company, not every organisation, not every sort of venue has that ability to fall back on such a large franchise to provide them with innovation. So I believe that using by diverting this money away from going to the Social Security Fund to help businesses innovate, to help pay their staff a living wage in a just transition, is the best use of this money. Because the less money we have to pay into the Social Security Fund at this point, which could then lead to people being paid a honest, fair wage for their labours, means that we do not have to supplement bad employers. We can help people pay their rent without having to fall back on income support. There's Deputy Barbara Award, I have to make the distinction clear and proper. Deputy Barbara Award mentions about pensions. And of course, pensions are an incredibly important thing. We're all of the massive benefit of being in this chamber. We have been offered the option to contribute to a pension. But if you're someone who is earning the current minimum wage, is on income support, unfortunately you will not have spare money to contribute to your own private pension. We had an inconvenient debate within this chamber as we've acknowledged that the pension paid from the Social Security Fund is not adequate to fully support you in our old age. Now, are we saying that we're going to have to continuously pay people more and more money out of that fund because they haven't, through other versions of income support, which helps top up the old age pension, because they've not been able to afford to contribute to their own private pension to allow that balance to come up? Because, again, when people earn the absolute basic minimum wage at the moment, they can't afford to pay their own private pension. The difficulty and struggle to aspire to even property ownership while the minimum wage is low, that these are dreams and aspirations that they cannot achieve. So we need to help businesses to develop their strategies and improve their productivity. Some may say that this argument about the money being used for the productivity fund isn't the nature of this debate. But actually, sir, I feel very much that it is. In fact, we've sat in this chamber many, many times where I'm going to say this, I felt sorry for the Minister for Economic Development because he has been subjected to question after question about what that scheme is going to do. So it has been clear and transparent within this Assembly that the reason for not diverting the funds to the Social Security Fund is to pay for this scheme. And so, as we've already heard from multiple members within this Assembly, and I think it's an important point to reiterate, if that £10 million is not spent within 2025, anything left will be returned to the Social Security Fund. If any of that £10 million is not spent in 2026, it is returned to the Social Security Fund. It is now, once this budget is approved, hopefully without this amendment, that it's up to businesses to prove that they require that funding, and if they don't require that funding, sir, that money will be going back to the Social Security Fund. And so, sir, I will sit down now because I think my point is clear that the reason why this diversion is more acceptable to the last one is because we clearly know where the money is going. The last time there was no clear destination for where that money was to go. It seemed to be to provide more breathing space than anything else rather than an actual destination. So thank you, sir.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, sir. Sir, I've struggled a bit with this debate, and I did say to a member, she knows who she is, that I would keep an open mind, and I'm still struggling with this proposition. I don't want to be disingenuous. We do have a party position on it, and ultimately, I want to talk through, I think, the complications of the way this is being done, but to get back to a point where we focus on the important issues, which I'll start with and hopefully finish with. The first one is really to first of all, about supporting businesses. I spoke a lot about that in a previous speech, which is now done and dusted. I won't go back to that. But also many of us in this Assembly, not just on this side, have made commitments, I think, in our manifestos and elsewhere to support a living wage. And I think we need to also weigh up what that means, because it's easy to have Hansard quoted back to you, and I've got absolutely no problem with people quoting back what I've said in this Assembly to me, so long as it's done accurately. I wanted to stand up before and say we need to be more imaginative with our surnames in this Assembly, because there are 100,000 people living in Jersey, and there's probably no reason to have so many people with the same surname. Although, I don't necessarily expect to see any more Deputy Tadiers or Constable Tadiers in the future, so in this Assembly, but who knows? We'll wait and see. So putting that aside, let's look at what's going on here. We've got various different moving parts, and I've just doodled down jotted down some rudimentary Venn diagrams. I think what we've got going on in the Assembly is that we've got members here who support the living wage. We've got members here, I think, who don't necessarily support the living wage. There are probably even members, dare I say, there's certainly members of wider society who'd probably abolish the minimum wage if they could and just leave it all to the free market. And then we've got subsections. We've got people who support the living wage, but who say we absolutely mustn't touch the Social Security Fund. And of course, there's the other Venn diagram is we mustn't touch the Social Security Fund at any cost. And so, whilst I've supported that in the past, I do actually have to look at the bigger picture here and say which ultimately is the right thing. Are we here just to be legalistic and say that because we made a decision in the past, we can't be more flexible in our approach? And if it is to choose a more to support something which is ultimately very positive. And ultimately it comes to the fact that do you apply that legalism in other areas? So if we're to boil it down to a philosophical principle, if I might be allowed to do so, if I was in the street and I saw somebody starving and the only way to get them food was to steal some bread from a shop, which I could, and I had no money, and give that person the food, would I ultimately say I can't do that because I know that theft is wrong? And I can't steal in any way, and therefore I'm going to let the person starve? Or would I say it's okay to steal a loaf of bread and give it to the person so that they can survive, maybe to live another day? It all sounds very Les Miserables, doesn't it? Jean Valjean, etc. And no doubt Deputy Balash will have something to say about that when he sums up. I thought I must give him something to respond to in his summing up at least. And I would say, of course, that's very hypothetical. That's not a decision that we are likely to ever have to make. But there is a political principle here that if the only way that we can get towards the living wage is to use a fund, because that's what the government is proposing, to get this done, and at the same time to support businesses who have told us that they would struggle getting towards a living wage, is it something that I can stomach and that maybe more of us should be able to stomach? Or should it simply be that the legalistic position about never using a fund for that should win the day? I think it becomes even more nuanced when I consider what the ultimate purpose of the Social Security Fund is for. Yes, it is, of course, to pay pensions, but it's also to more widely look after people's well-being. And elsewhere, we don't use this expression in Jersey, but it's called the Department for Work and Pensions elsewhere. This is very much a proposition which is about, not necessarily about pensions, but it's about work. It's about people who are paying contributions. So I think the Constable of St Clement's is quite right. He may well get strung up if he votes the wrong way when he gets back to St Clement's, although the Constable of St John's has got more appetite for risk, it would appear. Maybe those in St John's are a bit more liberal or a bit more, I don't know, willing to give the Constable time to explain. But I don't think, even if that were the case, that the Social Security Fund was somehow under threat, it's not the current pensioners who are going to be worried about it. It'd be people of my generation, so probably more likely. But we've been given assurances that actually this isn't a threat to the Social Security Fund, that it is going to be topped up. And I have to also take that into account when making my final decision. So for my part, I think I am still on the horns of that dilemma, but I'm thinking about actually, it seems to me, and I'm sure there are others in this position, if you've made commitments to the living wage, I wouldn't let ourselves be held hostage by the way that this funding mechanism is being put forward. Of course, it could have been that we had a different mechanism for funding this. And it comes down to the old chestnut, doesn't it, Deputy Southern, I look over, that we live in a low tax, low spend economy, and we've been told that there are very few levers for government to affect changes. And therefore, when it comes to the actual productivity scheme, it will absolutely be necessary, and I look at Deputy Jean as a fellow scrutiny chair colleague, for us to do a serious piece of work to actually look at how productivity is being applied, what the consequences are of that, what the intended consequences are, but also what the unintended consequences are. And I made the comment earlier to Deputy Jean that productivity is an interesting one because it is linked and it isn't linked to the living wage, and I'll probably explain what I mean by that. On the one hand, if you have a business and you say, I want to become my business to become more productive, so I can invest in new technology, and either immediately or later down the line, it means that you can fire all your staff. So I don't need to have my 10 labourers there working for me because I've got an all-singing, all-dancing machine, a robot, an AI, call it whatever you want. It may sound fantastical, but it's not. You know, this is how technology works. And 5 years down the line, you don't need any staff working for you. Who's paying the taxes and who's paying the social security contributions to go back into the economy, indeed to go back into the social security fund? So that is a complication if we're simply relying on taxation in its current format and also in the social security fund in its current format, because especially problematic if the company that's becoming more productive is a zero-rated company which doesn't pay any tax in Jersey. So these are issues that we're going to need to get to grips with anyway. It's not directly linked to this particular proposition, but it does remind us that we need to be focused not just on the present, but actually these things are happening now anyway, but we need to be focused on the short and medium term, because if things carry on like this, it's all very well to say we've got greater productivity, but if the only people benefiting from that productivity are the shareholders or the owners of the businesses, and that doesn't automatically find its way back into the government's coffers who are paying for these schemes in the first place, it can create contradictions. There is also the issue that I've got to get my head around, which is what is the direct link between the living wage and productivity, because it's not necessarily all those who transition to the living wage who will automatically get the support, and it doesn't necessarily mean that all those, I think I'm right in saying, who will benefit from productivity grants will automatically have to prove that they're paying the living wage. But that might be the case, and if that is the case, I'd like to be proven wrong. So I would hope that there is at least a more clear correlation between those two things. But let's not beat around the bush here. There is clearly politics involved. We have a different government here which wants to do more progressive things, but it's a gestalt, a composite government that we have, which composes left, right and centre, or rather, hopefully, centre left, centre and centre right, so more likely in the Jersey context. And there's a strong feeling, which is that a group which has a strong mandate, not exclusively my party, sir, knows that the living wage is the right thing to do. And whenever members of this assembly and outside have said, yes, the concept of a living wage is very clear. You know, Caritas have been long lobbying for that. They're not an extremely socialist organisation, I don't think, by any means, but they recognise the fact that it's generally a good thing that if you work, the wages you get paid should be enough to pay for your living expenses, because otherwise you're actually getting paid less than what it costs you to live. And often we just hear the words living wage, living wage, living wage so often that it becomes meaningless. But actually what we should be talking about is fair wages, a fair wage for a fair day's work. That's essentially what we're talking about. Nobody should be finding that concept objectionable. But the answer that we're always given, or we have been in the past, is that we can't do it because we need to find ways to support the low-paid industries, such as agriculture and such as hospitality. So what's being done? Exactly that. We have a package being put before us which does seek to address issues in agriculture, not simply in this productivity package, but in the wider package that is agricultural loans. I think we talked about that yesterday. Really great stuff that we might not see to eye on all the technical detail about who gets what, how, when and where, but we, I think, fundamentally agree that it's right to support agriculture, it's right to support hospitality, it's right to support Visit Jersey to try and improve the package of people coming to Jersey. And the bottom line is we can't have it always, I think. Sometimes we have to accept that there are imperfections to achieve a greater good. And I think ultimately, when it comes to this debate, that's where I fall down on the side of where is the greater good, where is the greater harm. And I think ultimately, whether it's taxpayers' money that's being used or social security contributions that keep people in work, which ultimately will reduce the need for supplementation. So money coming, which would otherwise come out of the Social Security Fund, is actually also going to be enhanced if we get to the living wage. I think on the global scheme of things, I can live with that. I wouldn't want to see the Social Security Minister put in a difficult position where actually she's been set up to fail because the government has proposed something which is so unacceptable to so many members in terms of the source of funds. And I think we've got to go beyond that. I think ultimately we've got to say there is no ideal solution, because if the solution was to increase taxes to pay for increased productivity, I know that many of the same members would be saying, actually, we can't do that, we're in a cost of living crisis. So I think what we have before us, if I can channel perhaps the spirit of former Senator Lamarck, is, you know, don't let the enemy of a good plan is a perfect plan. And I think what we have on the table seeks to do a lot of good for a lot of people in Jersey. And I think we don't need to be too legalistic about where the money's coming from, as long as it's sustainable, as long as that fund is healthy, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. It's been very interesting this afternoon, hearing the many sides of this debate, and the many sides of this debate in reflection to last year's debate is even more fascinating. But so I want to start by picking up on language. It's, you know, I'm something of a pedant at times, particularly written language, but I can be a bit of a pedant for language. And one of the things that I've picked up on this was the use of the word sacrosanct, and how apparently the Social Security Fund is sacrosanct, and the contract between the islanders and the way the Social Security Fund is funded is sacrosanct. And I can't help but think that's absolutely very, very far from the truth. Nothing in politics, I hate to bring this to members' attention, but nothing in politics is sacrosanct. A few hundred years ago, the divine right of kings was seen as sacrosanct. Everyone believed that the kings and other monarchs had absolutely the right given to them by God, and nothing could ever change that. And here we are today, obviously operating in a very different environment from a monarchical perspective. And we strongly believe that the divine right of kings doesn't exist. As a population, there may be one or two individual members here who think otherwise, but I think as a population, that once sacrosanct idea is now very much not sacrosanct. And this absolutely stands for the Social Security Fund. I also think that, and obviously there's no proof of this, but I was potentially around after in the 1974 Social Security law was brought forward, just because I was born in 1974. But I really don't remember that time at all. And for myself, I personally, and interestingly, I've spoken to other people of my age and my generation, we do not feel quite the same way as perhaps some other members of the Assembly who were around then and remember that then. We do not feel quite the same way about these things. We have different views. And certainly one of the views that I often pick up from people, friends, etc., that I speak to, is that government should use all of its resources as best as it can in many different ways. And that does mean for some, and I have been asked, why doesn't government make better use of the £2.5 billion in the Social Security Reserve Fund? Why doesn't it invest it in different ways within the economy? To get a return for the fund, yes, but why doesn't it deploy those funds in that sort of way? These are questions that I think over the coming years and decades will become much more acceptable within the Assembly. That might not be now. There are people who use the word sacrosanct, but I point out to them that's just not correct. There is nothing sacrosanct about it. But I think more importantly, you know, it's refreshing and it's nice from my personal perspective to hear Deputy Mezek, Deputy Felton, Deputy Dadia speak in a way that I agree with them in so many ways. I'm proud to be standing with them, and we're bringing forward this the living wage package of measures. And we're doing so because it's balanced off by the productivity support measures that are there to help businesses go through this transition period. It's a really good thing. I know that members of this Assembly have voted, you know, both because I was there in 2021 when we voted on Deputy Southern's proposition to bring forward that living wage, but I've heard other members of the Assembly who weren't there at that time speak in favour of the living wage. As some people would say, on all sides of the Assembly. One thing that's nice about this Assembly is it doesn't have sides. But from all corners of this Assembly, we have effectively fallen onto the idea that, or agreed on the idea that we want to move Jersey to a living wage. That does cause stress on businesses. There is no doubt that the scale of the rise in the living wage over the last few years has been, I think, around 50% in 4 years. That's really, really significant. That is difficult for businesses to understand because, as much as anything, it's a variable that businesses aren't aware of. And one of the first things I think the Chamber of Commerce asked me, I think I may have been the scrutiny at the time, but possibly as Minister, was please can we have the announcement of the living wage brought forward? Because it's a variable that is actually only being made available, you know, only been publicised in kind of October, November time in the past. And it's one of the things we want to do, and I know the Social Security Minister is working to do this, is to make these announcements much earlier in the year so that businesses then have a greater understanding and greater certainty going forward. And so we do know that when government is effectively setting wages, it's important, one, that businesses know as soon as possible, but when we move rapidly to set those wages at much higher levels, which is what we are doing, we are within that exercise at the moment, it's absolutely right that government helps those businesses deal with those changes. And we are dealing with those changes, I think, in a really good and far-sighted way. We're doing it, we are helping businesses, not just by subsidising wages, not just by giving pound for pound, here's the difference, in your pocket, there you go, we don't see you again. We're giving that support in the main via investment grants, which have to be backed, as we're saying 50-50 by the business themselves, but it's to encourage that investment which will create the productivity gains for the economy, which will create a much stronger economy in the future. That stronger economy in the future will be able to pay much better and more significant social security returns as a result. A weaker economy will have weaker social security funding going into the social security fund. A stronger economy will have much better funding going into the social security fund. It's interesting, I have heard the arguments about artificial intelligence and other technologies, you know, productivity can put people out of work. That's not really what happens. A stronger economy creates more jobs. The use of technology in businesses has, from time immemorial, created more work in terms of more opportunities, more jobs, more opportunity to be enterprising and innovative. We haven't got to that point yet where technology has just taken away jobs. We all know the famous, we don't know, I don't know if we do know, but you know, I love that the word sabotage and saboteur comes from the French for clog, sabot, and that was all about people trying to throw their clogs into the workings of the looms, etc., and machines to stop them working, a bit similar to the Luddite stories. And that's because they were fearful of those looms taking their jobs. But those looms didn't take the jobs. Those looms just created more jobs in different ways and created stronger and bigger economies. Now we can argue about other things. If I've made a mistake, please let me know. But that was my understanding. So I think, sir, it's really important that we do understand. On the one hand, we as an Assembly want to deliver a living wage. We as an Assembly and as a government are moving to deliver that living wage. But it would be wrong of us, I strongly believe that, if we didn't support businesses in the process. We're supporting businesses in the right way by helping them invest within their own businesses. Lifting that, what I've said in this Assembly before, is currently a low business investment kind of rate in the island. We'll help lift that. That's really important for a stronger economy. From the visitor economy perspective, we will be helping bring visitors to the island in the shoulder and the winter months. That creates productivity gains and does so, and I'm really pleased to tell Deputy Jean this, certainly that area, if we've got hotels having to accommodate visitors in the shoulder and the winter months, they will need staff to service those hotels. It would not be a case of productivity gains, meaning job losses at all. It would be quite the opposite. More likely they'll need to take on workers. I think Deputy Curtis, Alex Curtis, asked me about money to be paid to non-living wage businesses. You know, we are purposefully not saying that this money can only be given to those businesses which are currently not paying living wage to help them do it. They can apply, all businesses will be able to apply. The main things which stop businesses applying are about debts currently towards government in terms of GST and tax debts, other things. But we want businesses to be able to apply to this, whether they're living wage employees or non-living wage employees today. So that's definitely not the case that it is only, this funding is not there just for non-living wage businesses. Quite the opposite, because that would penalise those who have been doing, in inverted commas, the right thing for the last X amount of years. So I think it's really important that that is the case. This package, there is no doubt, it does fit in with the Future Economy programme. It does create the conditions for Jersey to be a consistently high-performing, environmentally sustainable and technologically advanced small island economy by 2040, with a labour market that values all workers. That, I think, is something that everyone in this Assembly can get behind. So, from my perspective, the use of the state's grant in this way is entirely appropriate. It is focused on workers. It is focused on being able to live in the world in the way that a pension is focused on doing exactly that. It is time limited, so it is a temporary intervention in that way. It is not something that is going to go on in perpetuity. And I'm really pleased that I can say this because I was making the same arguments last year, because I am one of the people in this Assembly who's able to make a consistent argument one year to the next. And that feels quite nice as well. But importantly as well, that the budget as proposed ensures that the support package is fully funded. That's really important because we need to give businesses certainty. We need to give businesses a vote of confidence in them and in the economy. I think as an Assembly, we need to stand behind our economy. We need to show businesses in this island that we support them. We're creating challenges for them. The living wage is going to create challenges for some businesses, but we're supporting them behind that. And that's what's really, really important. If the budget is agreed as proposed, then members will be asked to approve a change to the Social Security law to provide the value of the grant to be set in 2025 and 26 as opposed. That's, the law change will then set the formal legal value of the grant at that new level for those 2 years only. That's really important. And as Constable St John said, we'll be paying more this year than we were last year in terms of the grant. I think that is also really important because I think words like, words that have been used to suggest it is in some way taking from are wrong. We're providing more this time than we were last time, this year rather than last year. So I do ask members to reject this amendment by Deputy Balash. I do understand people who have strong feelings about this. I've spoken to them, I hear them, I heard the debate last time. I just think that in this case we are doing absolutely the right thing with that funding. It's a limited amount of money that's being used. It's not taking, it's just not providing to the fuller amount that we could have otherwise. And we're deploying it in exactly the right way, which will create a stronger economy in the future. And that stronger economy will be able to fund that Social Security fund in a much better way and much more strongly in the future as well, as a result of the £10 million that we're using this year and next year, or next year and the year after, if the budget is voted through as proposed. So please, I do ask members to reject Deputy Balash's amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I will be brief. Most of what has already been said about supporting to transition to fund the living wage, I do support. But what this amendment is about, I think, is highlighting the lack of sophistication and the integrity in the kind of policy and the strategy that's proposed to fund it. when you're working to establish sustainable wage fairness, looking for short-term solutions causes more problems than it actually solves. And the reason I say that is because I draw on the experience that I had when I worked in a charity in the UK that had only £60 million available to it. And it made a commitment to transition its workforce from minimum wage to living wage. And it cost the charity £5 million, I recall. That was the cost that was going to be. It was well articulated, evidenced as to where the impact would be felt and how many people would be affected by it. And what happened is that they addressed two particular issues. They tried to address two particular issues. The first one is, are we committed to paying a living wage to our workers? The answer was yes. And what resource could we be called on to deliver that wage? The first call was not made to government. It was made to the charity itself to look at how it could restructure, reorganise, refocus its business, the work that it did, to actually make the resources available through improved efficiency and productivity that were sustainable and could carry the transition over the longer term. So because of that experience, and because I think there are different ways, there are different alternatives, there are different options to actually address this issue, I have to support this amendment because I don't think it's the right thing to just dip into an insurance fund to bail out the demands around wage fairness. So on that basis, Sarah, I think I've got enough to say on that one, apart from the fact that I think also there's an important principle at stake here, is that this is a fund people pay into. And I do believe that public consultation and transparency would be a critical element in the decision-making process on this. Thank you.
Right, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on this amendment? Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I think it's important to speak at this point after the previous speaker to put this debate back into context. The Treasury Minister has already set out the serious financial consequences of approving this amendment. For me, the big flaw in this amendment is it takes money out of the allocated budgets and it doesn't suggest where we should replace it from, which puts me in an incredibly difficult position as the Social Security Minister who has taken responsibility to deliver on this States Assembly's commitment to raise our minimum wages significantly. I would like to explain how the government's proposals support the overall aims of the Social Security Fund, and why I, as Minister for Social Security, fully endorse the proposal to reduce the state's grant from 90 million in 2025 down to 80 million. I think it's important to see this in the wider context of the total state's grants over the next 4 years, which will total £345 million in states grants going into the funds. That's more than ever before. I'd also like members to think very clearly about what they think the purpose of the fund is. Lots of speakers today have spoken about the purpose of the fund. Nobody's clearly articulated what they consider to be the purpose of the fund. When I reviewed the legislation, I had a look to see whether in legislation there was a clear purpose of the fund. And it probably won't surprise the Attorney General to find that I didn't find one in the legislation. but it more suggested that it's around the funds that are coming out and the purposes that we as an assembly agree the fund to be used. And so for me, within this context, and this is a decision we're taking today, so we can set aside previous debates, previous decisions. This is a decision for today, and it's a different decision to the one that we made in previous years. I think it's very important to put the purpose of the fund in context, because there's been a lot of talk around pensions and pensioners. But the fund also exists to provide working age benefits to working age people. And that is something that is very heart of the work that this government is doing. So some of the benefits the fund provides: parental benefits. Imagine receiving your parental benefit, but then not earning enough to live on. It includes short-term and long-term incapacity allowance. Imagine not being able to afford healthy food for your family. Imagine the stress of earning a low income and whether that might put you in a position where you are indeed led to be claiming short-term incapacity allowance because you are too unfit to be working. It also funds insolvency benefit. Now, I, for one, would much rather be funding our just transition, as Deputy Cole suggested, to the living wage, working with the Economic Development Minister to avoid paying insolvency benefit. So I'd like to remind members who are speaking in favour of this amendment that this Assembly, just a few months ago, included its own commitment to, when it voted for the Common Strategic Policy, we included our commitment to move towards a living wage. And we've also already approved the legislation to enable me to facilitate the changes that needs. There's been a lot of emotive language, a lot of emotive speeches, and I'm not going to start quoting Hansard from the people that are now saying that they're going to support this amendment, but wouldn't have supported a similar amendment last year when it wasn't to be used for a fit-for-purpose reason that we've all agreed upon. But I think the wording in the amendment is unfortunate. I think the reference to plundering the fund that belongs to pensioners and prospective pensioners and using the fund as a piggy bank is highly emotive, and it doesn't actually help us come to a sensible and objective decision about how we move forward within this budget. And it is a budget. So today, and for this decision,
please could I have a point of question to the Attorney General regarding something that the...
No, not whilst the...
or point of clarification from the Minister.
The only thing you haven't just managed as a point of order. The questions to the Attorney General, yes, you can pose at any reasonable time, but by convention we let people conclude their speeches, and if an issue has arisen, then at the end of it you would ask the Attorney General. If you wish a point of clarification from the Speaker, you're entitled to ask for a point of clarification, but the Speaker has to agree to give way, and that's why quite often they're left to the end, because the Speaker often doesn't wish to give way when they're mid-flow. But so you wish a point of clarification? Deputy, do you wish to give way?
Okay, I'll ask for the Attorney General later, sorry.
Well, then that'll be at the end of the speech then.
Apologies to the Minister for interrupting.
It's all right. Please carry on.
Thank you. I will accept that apology. Today, I would like members to think about the prospective pensioners that Deputy Balash mentioned in his report, his amendment, particularly those prospective pensioners who are on low incomes that are currently struggling to make ends meet despite working full-time. The words of the amendment and many of the words spoken by people in the Assembly today will come as very cold comfort to those people. As Social Security Minister, I speak to a lot of third sector organisations, and I understand that St Vincent de Paul are now assisting more than 500 households with their food bank. That's 1,600 people. And they also tell me that their new clients tend to be those people on low incomes. These are exactly the people that we are wanting to help with this move towards a living wage. There are also people that are paying into the Social Security Fund via their contributions. These are working people. I would rather be supporting them through the living wage than having to support them through STIA payments because they are too unwell to work. Sorry, we've also been talking, a number of speakers have been, and the proposer of the amendment spoke about what the fund was used to set up for. I think I've answered that, but also suggested that it was a misuse of the money. I think we laid that to bed fairly early on in this debate when we clarified that this is an entirely legal thing to do. The money that we are talking about today, as the Constable of St Saviour, I think, rightly put it, is not coming out of the fund. It is taxpayers' money. It is for us as an assembly to make decisions, make choices about how we want to spend our money in any given year within the budget. And also reference was made with money being lawfully due. We've already heard other ministers say that the legislation has already been lodged. We've heard the Attorney General say that what we are doing here is entirely lawful. So I would suggest that those arguments really are red herrings. Sir, moving to a higher wage economy is fully in line with the overall aims of the Social Security Fund. The annual £10 million will be used to invest in skills and create more productive businesses. This is of direct benefit to workers and will help to ensure that they have rewarding and secure jobs into the future. A strong economy is vital to maintain the strength of the Social Security Fund, and I give my commitment to work closely with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development to support our key industries, and that will ensure that the fund will continue to pay pensions and benefits for many decades to come. I strongly urge members to support the government's aim, this Assembly's aim, to move towards a high value and sustainable economy and to reject this amendment.
Jenny, had a question for the Attorney.
Yes, thank you, and I apologise again for the Minister for interrupting. I would like to ask the Attorney General, the Minister in her speech alluded to that if this didn't pass, then we wouldn't be able to be doing a minimum wage or living wage as the Assembly had agreed. So, could we still?
I don't think that's a legal
if we've already passed a law to say that we will be increasing the minimum wage to living wage, this has to happen. Well,
I don't think that's a legal question for the Attorney General, Deputy. I think the fact is, if the states have resolved to do a thing, then one assumes the states will put that resolution into effect and it will find its money to do so from whatever source may be necessary.
But is it within the Minister's legal power to be able to raise it? Whether there is...
Is it within... So your question is...
Can the Minister still do it?
If this is or is not passed, is it within the Minister's
power,
legal power
to still do it? To
raise sufficient money to meet the commitments that the states have asked for? Is that
to raise the minimum wage to a living wage.
I'm not sure that is, but did you wish to take that one first, Minister? Because I see you have your light on.
I would be happy to address it as a point of clarification.
Let's do it as a point of clarification then, because it's not immediately clear in terms of clarification to me that it is a legal matter that can fall within the purview of the Attorney General. It won't be advising on what the law is or anything of that nature. So, Minister, yes, if you would take that as a point of clarification, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy to clarify. Yes, legally, I can sign the order to raise the minimum wage. I have the powers to do that, and the Assembly gave me those powers to change them over the next 2 years. I have worked very, very closely with other ministers, with the Chief Minister and the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, to work on a package which ensures that as we transition to higher minimum wages, we are able to support the sectors that would be mostly affected, which is why this business support package is so important. If the funding was unavailable for the business support package, and due to the budget being changed, the business support package needed to be amended, then I may well receive pressure from industry groups not to move forward with the minimum wage increase as planned because of the economic consequences that may have.
Very well. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I rise really, I was actually hoping not to speak in this debate at all, to be honest with you, but there's some, we talked about language being used in here, and the one which has really disappointed me most is by the Housing Minister when he talks about poverty wages. I'm absolutely staggered that Deputy Binet, Deputy Kovac, Deputy Porre haven't made any observations about that, because the last thing in this world is it's not a sustainable business model to pay poverty wages. If we can't have employees coming back regularly, being able to afford their rent, we don't have employees at all. That language is pretty sad, and I don't recognise it at all. The next thing I want to talk about is, and it's interesting, Deputy Morell made this point, wages have already gone up 40 to 50% over the last 4 years. And no support packages offered to businesses in that instance. We've just had to grin and bear it and get on with it, become more efficient, whatever the term is, squeeze margins, etc. So to now say, oh, well, we've got to now support businesses because we're going to transition them onto this, quote, living wage, I'm really interested to know who exactly they're going to be helping, because it's really interesting that Deputy Coles, I'm beginning to wonder if I'm in a surreal world or parallel planet here. I've got McDonald's written down here as a comparator to a local small business, really. We can gain efficiencies in big McDonald's. I'm going to throw in Tesco, Walmart. We can use any supermarket we like. Why are these people so super efficient? Why are they able to pay a living wage? Well, that's because they've got huge economies of scale. And the other thing that they can do is they can squeeze their suppliers into the ground. We're very aware of farming communities who are being destroyed because of the ability, the buying power, the huge buying power of these organisations. That's not something afforded to my business, and it's not something afforded to many of the small businesses on this island. In fact, most of the small businesses on this island. So the harsh reality is that to talk about more efficiency, it's quite interesting. I'm thinking we're in the hospitality industry. Everybody knows we're in the hospitality industry. What do? Do we automate all our services so that people self-help them in the coffee, to coffees to make drinks? I'm absolutely struggling to understand about this idea of efficiency. So as a result of that, if I can't become more efficient, therefore I don't get any help. I can't apply for any assistance at all. So I just have to get on with it, like hundreds, like thousands of small businesses on this island, and just get up with it, suck it up. And that's the bit which really bugs me. It bugs me also that we have medium-sized businesses who are probably going to be the greatest beneficiaries of any support package, because they have the scale that they can apply for these things. So we're going to assist medium-sized businesses who are going to apply for this, and that's going to be, and we take that out of a fund which we're trying to support pensioners. The whole point of the Social Security Fund, and it's good to hear why the Social Security Fund is there. It is used to support pensioners. It is used there to support people who fall ill, are long-term incapacitated. Absolutely, it's our island's safety net. We are raiding our island's safety net. Is that the right thing to do? Is that morally right? I have a real problem with that morally. And I think it's completely wrong that we should be doing that. So I shall therefore be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Porre.
Thank you, sir. My contribution is very much a reply to Deputy Ward. Just to say that as a Reform member, I many times have shared my concerns around the table on how the living wage would affect small businesses. My business is actually a very small business. And I am hoping that the Minister will bring a package that not only support medium businesses, but also, and more likely, the very small businesses. But yet, that does not stop me from believing that living wage is a very important implementation we have to bring to the island. And I would just like to further contribute to say my staff already receive well and above the living wage is now being proposed, because I believe in the hard work they do, and I do appreciate the support they give me. And ultimately, I want to leave the hours they do for me in my business with their heads up high, believing that what they earn is enough to contribute to the living wage. But yes, I do have some concerns, but not enough to stop rejecting the proposition. Thank you.
Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. I begin by asking members to reject the amendment that seeks to remove the funding allocated from the state's grant from the Social Security Fund to support the transition to a living wage for our island's workers and support businesses to be more productive. I will explain why this use of funds aligns perfectly with the core purpose of the Social Security Fund and why it is fundamentally different from past attempts to use the fund for unrelated government expenses. Those proposals I continue to strongly oppose. I ask to carefully consider the following points, especially the ones saying they support the amendment as the fund is misused, and hopefully they will change their minds. These points are directly tied to the legal and moral purpose of the fund and the long-term well-being of the people of Jersey, giving the exact reasons why members should change views from last year's similar debate. First, the Social Security Fund was created to support the welfare of islanders, especially those who rely on Social Security benefits. Ensuring workers earn a living wage directly supports this mission. By providing a wage that allows workers to live, we are not only helping those who might need Social Security in the future, but we are also actively reducing the strain on the fund. Workers earning a living wage are less likely to need assistance, which helps preserve the fund for those who truly need it in the future. Second, we cannot overlook the urgent need to support low-income workers, many of whom will benefit from the transition to a living wage and may rely on Social Security benefits later in life. By ensuring these workers earn a living wage now, we are reducing both their current and future reliance on welfare. This is a long-term investment in the health of the fund and helps to reduce pressure on the system in the years to come. By rejecting this amendment, we ensure our social safety net remains strong and is not overwhelmed by individuals struggling to make ends meet. Third, the Social Security Fund is not just about pensions. It plays a vital role in ensuring the financial stability of our population. Supporting the transition to a living wage is a proactive step toward that stability, which is exactly what the fund is designed to protect. Providing a living wage now helps prevent future economic instability caused by rising wage inequality and living costs. Moreover, this fund reduction is a temporary adjustment, not a permanent cut from the fund. As the Attorney General stated, using it in this way is in the grounds of the Social Security Law, Article 50. This is a targeted, time-limited measure to address an urgent need. It's not an arbitrary decision, but a carefully considered step to support workers transitioning to a living wage. Once the shift is complete, the full statutory grant will be reinstated. This is a responsible use of the fund aimed at long-term sustainability and fairness. I want to also argue what Deputy Barbara Ward said in her speech, that this will only add to the use of the fund in the future and increase the reliance on the system. As experienced in our family business, where we pay living wage, and how economics works, this investment would actually have the opposite effect, as it would make businesses more productive, employees better paid, increase employees' retention, and reducing reliance and use of the system. Therefore, overall, it brings savings on long term. By addressing the living wage issue now, we are reducing the future demand on the fund. Without this support, many employees would need to access social security benefits more often, which would place a greater burden on the system. By ensuring a living wage, we are reducing the future welfare claims, which will ultimately benefit both the fund and the wider community. Let me make it clear. This is not the same as past proposals where we saw a reduction to the state's grant with no clear purpose. This grant is ring-fenced for a specific goal, improving the financial well-being of working people. And importantly, any unspent funds will be returned directly to the Social Security Fund, ensuring that the money remains where it is needed. Accepting this amendment and removing funds from the living wage transition would also undermine commitment we've already made as an Assembly. The move toward the living wage is a key part of our approved common strategic policy and the broader commitment to fairness and economic stability in Jersey. If we allow this amendment to pass, we risk losing all the progress we've made toward improving the minimum wage, and we may miss the opportunity to make lasting, meaningful changes for the workers who need it most. Finally, I ask you to consider the potential consequences. If this amendment passes, it could jeopardize everything we've worked toward in improving workers' wages and their quality of life. The opportunity to make positive, lasting changes for our workers will be at risk. By supporting this temporary grant for the living wage transition and rejecting this amendment, we are fulfilling both our legal and moral responsibility to the Social Security Fund, while also investing in the long-term economic well-being of our community. This measure is aligned with the fund's core purpose, ensuring financial stability and security for islanders, particularly low-income workers, and helping to prevent future strain on the fund. With that in mind, I urge you to reject Deputy Ballard's amendment and allow the related ministers to continue making responsible use of the funding to support the crucial work of transitioning to the living wage, a commitment we have all made together in this Assembly. Thank you.
Very much. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. We I think, unfortunately, have spent a little bit too much time today trying to prove each other wrong, question each other's motives, and not really been addressing the issue. I will be repeating, so rather reinforcing some of the points my colleagues have made, because I think it's important that we actually understand why we're doing this and for what reason, for the long-term benefits right across our society, our community, excuse me, and our economy. I voted with Deputy Ballard last time because there was no specified use of the monies to be held back, sir, and I would do exactly the same today if that were the case. In fact, I believe the Council of Ministers would do exactly the same today, is that what's proposed. If somebody came along and proposed that we wanted to change the supplementation to the fund for an unspecified use, we would have thrown it out. This government's proposal, sir, is, however, completely different to that put forward last year. The money withheld from the state's grant will be allocated to a dedicated head of expenditure to be used for a specific purpose which is fully aligned with the long-term aims of the fund itself, sir. And Deputy Morell has explained that. There has been presentation to states members on the detail of how we're going to use that money. And that information is available again at any time, that detailed information at any time. Our economists have modelled an increase in contributions to the social security contributions as a result of the move to a higher minimum wage, a living wage, a higher wage economy, which I believe we all want, to be 1.3 million in 2025, 2.7 million in 2026, and this is ongoing, sir. So there is a real and tangible benefit in contributions being collected into the future over and above what we would have if we weren't transitioning to a proper living wage. I join other well, I think the Social Security Minister mentioned the use of emotive language, which is sometimes necessary, but not always. Sometimes it's too emotive and can lead to scaremongering. Words like plunder, Maxwellian raid, raiding. Deputy Wall said we're raiding it. Deputy Wilson, I think our policy had a lack of integrity. And I'm thinking, reminded of the words of the Constable of St. Clement, my good friend, who might need some protection when he goes back to his parish hall this evening. And he shouldn't do, because his parishioners have nothing to fear from what we are doing, nothing at all. And if they do, it's as a result of emotive language being used, which can do nothing other than to cause anxiety, where it's not necessary in our community. So there might be pensioners listening to this, people in receipt of age-related income, who are worried that they're going to start losing benefits or see a reduction. That's the result of the use of emotive language when it's not correct, because what we are proposing here will not make any significant difference to the fund. It certainly won't reduce it in a way that would impact upon the recipients. In fact, so we are increasing funding. And I'm just going to read some figures out. In 2015, supplementation paid was 65.3 million. In 2016, it was 65.3 million. In 2017, 65.3 million. In 2018, 65.3 million. Anybody want to guess? 2019? 65.3 million. There was a break during COVID, so the monies were directed to we all know what the monies were utilised there for. In 2024, the supplementation paid was 77.5 million. Under this plan in 2025, that will increase to 80.3 million. In 2026, 82 million. In 2027, 90.5 million. In 2028, 92.5 million. Again, as the Social Security Minister alluded to, this plan actually will put £345 million into the fund, sir. And if I can just refer members to page 85 of the budget, I'll try and do it without my specs. No, I better not. They will see, sir, that the opening balance of the Social Security Fund and Reserve Fund, sir, is 2,500 million, 2.5 billion, 2,517 million pounds. Roughly speaking, sir, the social security contributions in 2025 are estimated to be 265 million. A grant to the Social Security Fund, as specified, 80.3 million. Benefit payments, sir, between old age pensions and working age benefits, another 334 million. Investment income, 109 million. The total of the fund, so that demonstrates that for that year, and the same pattern extends in 26, 27 and 28, the fund, with the proposed level of supplementation that we are providing, will pay all of its pensions and benefits out, every single penny, and continue to grow significantly. In 2026, the fund estimate to be the collective value 2,634 million. In 2027, 2,770 million. In 2028, 2,922 million. Significant growth in the fund. It's probably healthier than it ever has been. Deputy Balash's report refers to the Social Security Fund as an asset for the benefit of the people of Jersey. The temporary package of measures for 25 and 26 is designed to protect those assets in the long term through supporting the development of a higher wage economy. Moving to a higher wage economy is fully in line with the aims of the Social Security scheme to protect workers. Investing in skills and productivity schemes will also be of benefit to many workers and ensure that they can continue to enjoy secure and rewarding employment. This in turn will help support the long-term future sustainability of the fund, sir. And I repeat, our economists estimate the total increase in social security contributions collected in 2025 will be 1.3 million higher. In 2026, 2.7 million higher, sir, and that's going to be ongoing. So there is a real tangible benefit in relation to the total of social security contributions are collected, sir. The latest fiscal policy panel report identifies a possible risk to inflation if the increase in minimum wage is not accompanied by improvements in productivity. As such, it is vital that this package is provided to drive those productivity increases. The FPP also states that further fiscal pressures from increases in expenditure or reducing revenue would be strongly advised against, and therefore moving this expenditure to regular budgets or the strategic reserve is not recommended. The package is also fully in line with the Future Economy programme, which aims to create the conditions for Jersey to be consistently high-performing, environmentally sustainable, technologically advanced, and we become a technologically advanced small island economy by 2040, with a labour market that values its workers. The increase in the minimum wage from 2022 to 2026 will be in the region of 70%, a little bit over that, more than double the inflation level over the same period. And as such, some form of business support package is fully justifiable to help businesses adjust to such significant change in business models. And we have assured businesses that we would accompany the move to a living wage with that support. And in fairness to the businesses, the vast majority, they are coming on that journey with us because they recognise the challenges, of course they do, and the costs, but they also recognise the benefits to our economy, to our society, and to our community of moving to that higher wage economy, sir, given the recent increases in inflation and the high cost of living in our island. And that refers to the point of clarification that Deputy Adjournment raised and the Social Security Minister dealt with well. And that would put her and the government in a difficult position of balancing what we want to do, what we have to do on the back of this Assembly's direction. Scrutiny has been very hot in questioning us, making sure we follow this Assembly, and if we don't, there has to be a good reason why. And if we can't follow the journey to the living wage we have mapped out with the business support, it will be because this supporting Deputy Balash's amendment today would make that very difficult. So the message is society can still have confidence that the fund is strong, it's getting stronger, it's receiving adequate, arguably more than adequate, through the payment of supplementations. And that is perhaps a discussion that is long overdue. We go back, my father and my grandfather, no longer with us, used to talk about the times of the Royal Square and Philip the Social Security. They were there, they were present at these historic events. But they were also for modernisation and wanted to be part of a society that moved with the times and didn't entrench itself in the past politically. And that's no disrespect to our long-standing traditions in this Assembly. But we do need to have, I think, discussions at some stage in the near future to avoid these sorts of conversations and address any level of uncertainty that there is, to ensure that the supplementation levels are not just adequate, they're sufficient, adequate, but that the fund is not over-contributed because it's the taxpayer that pays the supplementation. So we need to continuously review that to make sure the money going into the fund is adequate, generous, but it's not over-regulated, because people understand how funds work. Well, no, there are dangers. Sorry, over-contributed, not over-regulated. There are dangers to over-contributions to funds, which I won't go into now, sir. So our supplementation in the future needs to be properly balanced, needs to be adequate, and it needs to meet the needs of society, provides reassurance to those, not just now, but in the future, who are going to be benefiting from the fund, sir. And that balance also, I believe, always needs to be at the forefront of the mind of this Assembly when we look to the future, sir. Thank members for their contributions today, sir, and I ask members on this occasion not to support Deputy Ballash's proposition, but to support the government to deliver the living wage, long overdue, with the necessary support packages, sir, to bring the businesses with us. Thank you.
Deputy Miller, is your light on for... No.
I was going for the stereo effect, sir. Sorry. Thank you.
Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I look round the Assembly today and take myself back 10 years or so, and I can count, I think, half a dozen members of the Assembly that sat with me at that time around the Council of Ministers table, including the bringing of this amendment and indeed the Chief Minister who's just spoken. And in those days, 10 years ago, I think we had what I believe is the first presentation from officers on the living wage. And the advice was quite clear. We need to move to the living, well, we can move to the living wage. The effects on the government exchequer and our coffers are neutral. However, if we do this move, that there will be two industries seriously affected, agriculture and tourism. And my views on the living wage have stayed the same since those days. As a great supporter of farming and fishing, I said I couldn't support it until such a time as we had the means in place to help those industries transit to the living wage and how they coped with it. I don't need to speak much further than that, sir, other than to say around the Council of Ministers table we have come up with a package which has been transferred through the Rural Support Scheme and Marine Support Schemes, and will give additional money to farmers and fishermen to help them with this move, a move that I understand the economic reasons for and the benefits to the economy that it will deliver. But still the same, vitally important to me to make sure that those industries I represent are treated in a way that allows them to cope with this, with many of their workers on the minimum wage. So I say to members, it's been a long time coming. We finally come up with a support package, or a package to help transit those industries that will need help. I urge members to support that package, which unfortunately means resisting this amendment from Deputy Ballash. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I am certainly an advocate of a living wage. It was something that I stated in my manifesto during the election. And I am pleased to see that there is support for the living wage across this state's assembly, even with some centre-right politicians finally concluding that it is the right thing to work towards, having seen the minimum wage be defeated on consecutive occasions in previous states' assemblies. However, I do have to question the use of the £20 million and how it is going to be applied as well. I did have a conversation with the now Treasury Minister to seek alternative routes, and that included utilising the Social Security Reserve Fund to then ensure that a transfer could be made into the Social Security Fund, and to then withhold some of the state's grant to give us a larger surplus in the Consolidated Fund. So then we could transfer more into the strategic reserve. But unfortunately, no agreement happened, and therefore I decided not to proceed with an amendment for this government plan. But we must remember here, sir, the Social Security Fund, and there's been a number of actuarial reports, it shows us that the fund will eventually be exhausted. I believe it's in 2081. And we have to think about the yet to be born and the impact the trends have, because it will be they who bear the consequences, and we will no longer be held to account because most likely none of us will still be in office. And unfortunately, sir, I know some people might, maybe laugh at the way how I look ahead, and potentially maybe too much, but in some respects I am panicked by the fact that we have a state's grant that is used to top up the Social Security Fund, because the Social Security contributions themselves are not sufficient enough. And of course we have this ongoing level of expenditure that is only going to increase with an ageing population as more people move towards pensionable age, and therefore more transfer payments will be utilised, and that means more income must be generated into the fund. And what I don't like to see is year on year, when we come here today, sir, in this chamber, we see proposals being brought forward to make changes to the way how the Social Security Fund receives income into it. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent that has already been seen this term. I remember in December 2022, I think there was only about 14 politicians who voted for that proposal. I think there's about 32 who voted against, and I think a very clear message was sent on that day. And I hope the same applies here, because we must remember that some of these businesses have been aware for some time now that the Council of Ministers are intent on implementing a living wage. And if they were in a position, because their business model was one that was potentially able to cater for a living wage, then they would have increased the baseline wage, and they have not. And so there is going to be potential impacts, because margins are most likely going to be reduced, even if there is a level of investment within those businesses, and if that's to be a mixture of both government and private investment. The likelihood is that some consumers are not going to spend if there's going to be price hikes, and therefore you will probably then see output be reduced. And so there is going to be a potential consequence, and even the chief economist has made this quite clear in a public hearing with the Economic and International Affairs panel, that it could come as an expense to the public purse when we look at Social Security, likely to see more expenditure to cater for those who have been subject to redundancies. I think the figure was about £400,000 that the panel was given, but I think the likelihood is it could potentially be much more when we are looking at the subsidisation of rent plus the transfer payments that also have to be incurred on a weekly basis as well. So I believe the costs could be much higher. And so it's just something that we, as states members, should be mindful of, because there will be some businesses who will not live to see the transition through to a living wage. And I think for many islanders, they are going to be concerned that public funds are used to invest in enterprises that are not long-term sustainable in a living wage economy. And so there is going to be much public funds that are going to be potentially wasted. And that is a huge concern of mine. I'm somebody who is certainly a market pre-distributionist. I'm somebody who believes in incomes increasing. I believe in alleviating poverty. However, I do not believe that the government should intervene in enterprise to the point that we could potentially be subsidising firms across all industries. And that is a concern that I have, when quite clearly businesses could seek private finance, they could go to the bank, and they could arrange borrowing requirements if they wanted to invest in their businesses. I don't believe, though, that it is the government's role to be providing such subsidies during a time when we are seeing increased government expenditure. We have what is quite clearly a fiscally expansionary government budget because we've given public sector workers above inflation pay awards, and that has really rendered the Council of Ministers' ability to bring forward other proposals that maybe some of the ministers were wanting to put forward. And so there has to be an element of constraint on public expenditure because we cannot continue year on year. And when we see something like this being proposed, a £20 million package across 2 years, well, what happens once the funding is pulled? Those businesses are all of a sudden left by themselves to it. And only then will they realise that their business model is not sustainable. How are they supposed to live? They will soon find themselves in a position where they've got no choice but to dissolve. And so that is the concern that I have when the government is utilising public funds and then those funds are going to be wasted. However, if we were looking at government providing targeted levels of expenditure, then you might be looking, for instance, at agriculture that has seen a reduction in spend year on year across the last couple of decades. Why are we not focusing targeted investment there? Why are we not trying to encourage more young farmers into the industry? But instead, we're focused on the baseline wage being increased. And we're forcing it, but we're using government expenditure, and that is the concerning thing, because it should not be the case for the government getting involved in this respect. You know, if you want to look at the minimum wage, you're better off, over the long term, increasing it gradually, bit by bit, instead of just doing it over a 2-year period. Otherwise, what you will see is structural unemployment. It will happen, especially in some of the industries where, for instance, investment is most likely to happen in technologies. And so human labour, the role of human labour, is most likely going to be displaced. So I think I've made my point very clear, and I will be supporting Deputy Banish's amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Banish to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank all members who have contributed to what I think has been an interesting debate. I'm particularly grateful to the Attorney General for his interventions, with which, of course, I absolutely agree. And I want to begin, actually, by looking at the question, whose money is it? Whose money is being used to pay for the package of support for the living wage? I say it is pensioners' money. The government says it is taxpayers' money. Who is right? And of course it can be argued both ways. Let's look at the law first of all. I was a member of the Social Security Committee in 1974, which introduced the Social Security law, and I hope I then understood it and still do. Article 4 provides for contributions to be paid into the Social Security Fund by employers and by employees. It also provides for money to be paid in by the states to supplement those contributions. The amounts paid by employers and employees are earnings related. That means that the lower paid make contributions that are less than the amount necessary to fund a full pension. And that is why those contributions have to be supplemented by the states to ensure that at retirement age, all employees will get a full pension. That has been the position since 1974. Article 9A of the law, introduced I think the Treasury Minister said in 2011, sets out the formula for calculating the amount of supplementation that is needed. And the law says that the amount calculated in accordance with that formula shall be paid. It is a legal obligation. Deputy Joseph, I think, called it a question of trust, but it certainly is also a matter of law. Now, it is arguable, as the government says, that the amount to be paid is taxpayers' money. It certainly comes out of tax revenues. But look at it another way. If I owe you £1,000 and I have £1,000 in my bank account, to whom does that money belong? One might say that legally it belongs to me as the account holder, but morally, does it not belong to you or to whom the money is owed? You are entitled to it. In a sense, it is being held on trust for you. So the £10 million for 2025, with which we are concerned this afternoon, might belong at present to the government. But does it not belong morally to the Social Security Fund, to which it is due as a matter of legal obligation? Today, at present, there is a legal obligation to pay that £10 million to the Social Security Fund. It is only if the states pass regulations varying the amount that the legal obligation changes. Some members might think that this is a quibble. As I said in my opening speech, and I use my words carefully, I think it is amoral, improper, and wrong to take what is morally pensioners' money due to the fund and to use it for purposes which have nothing to do with the payment of pensions and other benefits which the law supports. In the United Kingdom, as I understand it, there is a different system. Pensions are paid out of the national insurance contributions, which are paid in, so that what is paid in is immediately paid out. If not enough by way of contributions is paid in, then they have a problem. Our system is much more secure. We have a fund, two funds actually, the Social Security Fund and the Social Security Reserve Fund, which offer security that state pensions can be paid for many, many years into the future. And it is that security, sir, that we are risking. The Treasury Minister asserted that if this amendment was passed, the whole budget was set at risk, and I don't accept that. At the very worst, the money could be found from the strategic reserve. If it is the strategy to rush through the living wage at this cost, then perhaps we ought to go to the strategic reserve. But I don't think that is necessary. Deputy Mezek is apparently a convert now to fiscal prudence, and one must rejoice in that. He was critical of me by suggesting that no other solution was offered, and he suggested that if the upper income limit for contributors was abolished, then there would be an alternative way of funding it. But contributions are not a tax, Deputy, if I may address him through the chair. They are a premium for which the contributors earn benefits at the end of the day. But when I put this amendment together, I did indeed consider whether the amendment should contain some element of requiring the money to be found from the strategic reserve. But I was informed that that was not necessary because the states are only addressing in this budget debate the year 2025, and because the consolidated fund would be reduced but not exhausted, there was no need to find some other source of funds for the payment of this amount for the living wage. So the Minister for Social Security justified taking money from the fund because she said that it was aligned to the purpose of the fund. I don't think she used that precise word, but that was the effect of what she said. But as Deputy, he's not here, Renouf, I'm sorry, Deputy Renouf, I think it was, who said there was at the original discussion of the introduction of the living wage, no question that it was going to be paid for out of the Social Security Fund. It was going to be paid for by savings across the board, and those savings could not be achieved. So casting around for a lifeline, someone must have thought, let's have another go at the Social Security Fund. There's lots of money there. They won't miss £20 million. And then at the next stage, how can we justify taking money from the Social Security Fund? The Minister told the scrutiny panel on which I sit that using the fund was absolutely in line with the intent and purpose of the Social Security Fund. And that sounds good, but I'm afraid it does not stand up to scrutiny. The intent and purpose of the fund is to secure the payment of pensions and other benefits like disability allowances. It's got nothing to do with the question of protecting jobs, as the Minister asserts. If supporting the economy is a justification for plundering the Social Security Fund, then heaven help our pensioners. Their future security really is in danger. As Deputy Renouf said, any policy which might lead to growth in the economy or extra productivity and an increase in contributions will be a justification for removing money from the Social Security Fund. That's the bigger picture, which I hope that Deputy Tadier will think about. It is not in line with the purposes of the fund. It's reasoning which simply does not hold water. I wish ministers could be more straightforward. We are short of cash. The Social Security Fund is flush with it.
we are going to help ourselves to some of it. That is the real truth of the matter. And it is wrong. The money belongs morally to pensioners and prospective pensioners. It should not be misused in this way. I regret that the Minister for Social Security is not protecting the fund as she should. Ministers in the Reform Party are consumed by a desire to get the living wage proposal over the line. The Chief Minister has closed his mind to what he knows to be wrong because of his Faustian pact with the Reform Party. It's a melancholy state.
So can I just ask which is which, sir, in that relationship?
I'll leave members to make up their own minds on that. Sir, members should stand up for the principle because it's an important one. Funds should not be sidelined into packages for which they were not intended. If parish rates were used for purposes other than the interests of parishioners, I think that constables would find themselves in a lot of trouble. So members, many of them, made the point that supporting the package is going to have positive advantages for the economy. A just transition, Deputy Coles called it, I think. People's well-being was referred to by others. And I'd like to make my position crystal clear on this. I support the introduction of the living wage. Like the Reform Party, it's a manifesto commitment of the Jersey Liberal Conservatives. But rushing to introduce the living wage has led to a support package which seems to me to be of dubious quality. A number of questions arise, and Deputy Andrews referred to some of them. Will taxpayers' money be provided to businesses which may not survive anyway? And if that happens, will the package be an obstacle to the creative destruction which is part of the process of economic growth? Is the door open to fraudulent activity, or are ministers entirely satisfied that that has been scrutinised out? And the final matter on the package is that hardly any time has been allowed for a careful scrutiny and discussion of it. So I'd like to close by referring to something that Deputy Morell said, and I'm delighted he's just returned to the chamber. He said, if I made the note correctly, that nothing is sacrosanct in politics, and he called in aid the divine right of kings. I think that some things are sacrosanct in politics. Trust is sacrosanct. Pension funds should be sacrosanct. The Social Security Fund is based upon the expectation that contributors, both employers and employees, and the state's supplementation will be used to support the payment of pensions and other benefits set out in the 1974 law. We should not undermine that trust by using money due to the fund for a collateral purpose. I move the amendment, sir.
The bill is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the 17th, I beg your pardon. The, which one? The First Amendment. There we are. I'm late to the party, I apologise. I invite the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 21 votes pour, 25 votes contre, no abstentions. Yes.
Those voting for the Connotabs of St Brelard, Trinity, St Martin, St Clement, St Mary and St Saviour. Deputies Gardner, Moore, Ozef, Balash, War, Miles, Scott, Reniff, Jearn, Howell, Curtis, Ward and Wilson, and Deputy Andrews, and online Deputy Doublé. And those voting contre, the Connotabs of St Helier, St Peter, St John and Grouville, and Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Luce, Morale, Nahegara, Ayer, Ward, Alves, Gorst, Farnham, Mezek, Coles, Horay, Feltham, Miller, Binet and Kovac, and online the Connotab of St Juan, Deputy Curtis and Deputy Binet.
So I can ask this, I've never been asked this. Is it ever possible to ask who the members that are supposed to be here but didn't vote?
No, we don't have a
mechanism. We don't ever do that, but there are clearly some, it's just an interesting quirk.
That I think can be probably
I'll ask
dealt
BBC,
with if necessary, but I'm not sure we can do anything to ensure that now. Technically, we have 8 minutes in which we could start the next amendment, but I wonder
I'd like
if...
to propose the adjournment, sir.
Yes. The adjournment is proposed. I am assuming that members agree with that. I would simply mention that I have allowed an urgent oral question from Deputy Tadier, which I propose to take first thing tomorrow morning, and I will allow 10 minutes for the question, which is the equivalent that would have been had it been an oral question lodged in appropriate time. Yes, Deputy Morel?
Thank you. So it's just in regard to that urgent oral question. I have circulated a response, as I said I would, to States members in the last few minutes.
Well, do you still wish to ask the oral question, Deputy?
So I've literally just opened the email, so I need time to look at it. I'm also aware that, just to give members very brief context, the online timetable last night may be different to what is appearing now on Condor's website. So there was a week, for example, that had no votes at all last night. But if I could speak to the Minister overnight, sir,
yes,
the intention
and
is
if you could
to
tell us first thing in the morning whether or not you still wish to ask your oral
Thank you,
question,
sir.
you have leave to ask it, and if you still wish to do so, that can be done. Very well, the Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.